Good afternoon. This is BBC One with coverage and analysis of the results from yesterday's elections with Huw Edwards and Reeta Chakrabati.
These elections decide who runs local services. They're also a crucial test of what people think of our political leaders. And right across the UK, the results are now flooding in. Labour looks to be heading for a narrow lead in the national share of the vote. Keir Starmer's party has won some stunning victories in London, including Barnet Council, Wandsworth and Westminster. Conservatives have lost overall control of councils like West Oxfordshire, Southampton and Worcester, but they'll take comfort from the fact that in England outside London, Labour's progress has been more modest. The Greens and the Lib Dems are doing well. Sir Davey was out this morning congratulating his Lib Dem team in southwest London, where they've picked up seats. And the party has gained Kingston upon Hull from Labour. The early results from Scotland suggest that the SNP will remain by far the largest party, with an interesting battle for second place developing between Labour and the Conservatives. Conservatives did well in Wales at the last local election, so they may be bracing themselves for a difficult afternoon from Denbighshire in the north to the Vale of Glamorgan in the south. But perhaps the most significant result coming later today will be in Northern Ireland, where my colleague Anita McVeigh is watching the events unfold.
Yes, almost 6 hours into the count here, Huw, and no one elected yet to the Northern Ireland Assembly, so still very early days. We'll be doing our best to look at the data so far and tell you about the direction of travel.
Anita, many thanks, and Reeta Chakrabati with us, of course, at her touchscreen, keeping track of all the latest developments. Also with us is Professor Sir John Curtis with his analysis of the emerging political landscape. Our team of correspondents are at all the important counts, and with political reputations at stake, Vicky Young is with me here to tell us what the results mean for the party leaders. So, join us for the voters' verdict in Election Day on the BBC. Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the BBC's election studio here at New Broadcasting House in London. We are keeping tabs on all the developments, the remaining councils to declare in England, the local elections in Wales and in Scotland, all of them providing very important signals for us. And crucially in Northern Ireland, a little later, we should get the emerging picture in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and where Sinn Fein may or may not emerge for the first time as the biggest party. So all of that to come. But some breaking news as we come on air, because there's been a statement from Durham Constabulary to do with the controversy around Sir Keir Starmer and some of the allegations made in the wake of Partygate at Westminster affecting the Conservatives. Vicky is with me, of course. Vicky, what do we know?
Well, this is all about what Labour was up to, what Sir Keir Starmer was up to during COVID restrictions. As you say, an awful lot about what was going on in Downing Street. And don't forget, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor themselves have been fined for breaking the law, for breaking their own rules, the ones that they made. But there has been some pressure on Sir Keir Starmer. He was in Durham when this happened. He was out campaigning, and then he gathered with colleagues where they were working late into the night. They had some food. There was a picture of him taken, drinking a beer, taken through a window. At the time, Durham Constabulary earlier this year looked at it. They said they looked at the video and they decided that there was no breach of the rules. But they've just said in the last half an hour that following receipt of significant new information over recent days and following the conclusion of the pre-election period, they didn't want to do anything then. They're now confirming that investigation into potential breaches of COVID-19 regulations is now being conducted. So obviously difficult and embarrassing for the Labour leader. He, of course, has said that the Prime Minister should resign for what he's done. A Labour Party spokesman in response to all of this saying, we're obviously happy to answer any questions, and they remain clear that no rules were broken. So what went on during COVID causing both political parties a lot of problems here. Interesting, Vicky, isn't it? Because there'll certainly be some, I'd imagine, some frustration in Labour ranks given what's happened here, because they've been saying very consistently, look,
Durham Police looked into this. They were happy that no rules were broken, no one's been fined, and as you say in the statement, it says it was concluded originally that no offence had been established and therefore no further action would be taken. Now, of course, the phrase that we'll be focusing on, and everyone else will, is the receipt of significant new information over recent days. Now, we don't know what that is, but clearly this adds a wholly new dimension to the row which has started with Partygate and has now expanded to include potentially Sir Keir Starmer and some of his own colleagues. Yeah,
and I think the issue with all of this, and this applies to the Met Police who have been investigating what's been going on in Downing Street, is we don't know what stage their investigation is at. We don't know the order in which they're doing it. We know that they've been looking at some parties in Downing Street. They've been sending out questionnaires. More seem to be going out. So we are a little bit in the dark until the fines are issued. And even then, the police don't tell us what they're for. We're relying on Downing Street telling us what they're for. And I think the same thing here with Durham. They said, the police force there, that they looked into this. We don't know how broadly they investigated this at the time. We don't know whether they questioned people. We don't know whether they asked for more evidence. But now they're saying that there has been new evidence that's come to light, partly, of course, because lots of Tory MPs have been really going on about this during the election period, wanting to try and put the focus on Labour rather than the Conservatives. And Sir Keir Starmer has been forced to give more and more information about exactly what was going on. And remember, at the time, you could meet in groups of 6 outdoors. There were restrictions in place. It wasn't the height of the lockdown. And there were, of course, you could gather for work. You could gather for campaigning, which is what they were doing. The question is, was it reasonable to gather in this way for work? And I think what some people will be looking at that and saying, should people have been looking at ways not to gather in relatively large numbers? But, we don't know how many people were there. We know a little bit from the newspapers about the fact they ordered quite an expensive takeaway curry for lots of people. But some people will be saying, well, did they have to do that? Did they carry on working after 10 o'clock at night? And Labour have said all along that people work very hard during election campaigns, and they do work late into the night. And then being able to eat, sit round, have some food as a break, that is completely acceptable under the rules. We'll now find out what Durham Police think about that.
Indeed. So, as you say, it's a statement. It invites lots of questions, but we certainly don't have answers to those questions yet. So if there's anything more on that, we'll bring it to you straight away. Time is coming up to 5:55. So let's get right up to date with the elections, because that's the business of the day. It's counting votes right across the UK. We've had lots of results from English councils overnight, with some spectacular wins for Labour, certainly in London, with some of those great symbolic victories that they've had in places like Wandsworth and Westminster and in Barnet. But of course, there's a huge swathe of results as well throughout the rest of England as we go into the afternoon here. So, Reeta, can I ask you to just take us through some of the main results so far?
Yes, here are some of the key results, Huw. You mentioned Westminster and Wandsworth, 2 huge boosts for Labour, will really have improved their morale overnight, because Westminster has never been Labour, has always been Conservative since its inception. Wandsworth has been Conservative since 1978, well, no longer. They're now red councils. Along with Barnet, very eye-catching progress for Labour in the capital. Labour has also gained West Dunbartonshire. Now, that is the first council in Scotland to have changed hands in this election. And it's interesting because in Scotland, by and large, there are many fewer councils that are actually controlled outright by any one party, because it's a proportional representation system. So that's a good gain for Labour there in the west of Scotland. They've also gained Rossendale in Lancashire. On this side of the screen, you can see the Conservatives have lost overall control of Wokingham. That is where the MP John Redwood, a Brexiter, has his seat. They've also lost control of Huntingdonshire. That's where Sir John Major had his seat when he was an MP, and lost control of Maidstone too. Now, in all of these seats, the losses have been in single figures of seats, but nonetheless, it does mean that they're all now hung councils, no longer under Conservative control. And for the Lib Dems, a highlight in Hull. That's a Lib Dem gain. They have a majority of 1, but they are now controlling the council of Hull. You might look at this screen and think, well, that looks like a pretty good night and morning of it for the Labour Party. But I want to show you
the overall scoreboard so far, and that tells a slightly different tale, doesn't it? Yes, Labour up by 43 seats compared to the Conservatives down by 171. But look at Labour compared to the Lib Dems. They've gained 77 councillors in this election. That's from a much smaller base, as you can see. The Lib Dems on 333 councillors, as opposed to the Labour Party, who've got over 1,000 more. And a word also for the Greens, who have done well, picking up 28 councillors. So I think this screen shows you really the sort of very mixed picture for Labour. Some really stunning results in London, but not so much everywhere else.
Reeta, many thanks. Back with you in a while. I want to talk now about the counting that's going on in Scotland, where, of course, the SNP has been all-powerful for so many years. Let's look at the state of the parties right now. 6 of the local authorities of 32 councils there being elected, 6 of them declared already. And if we look, the SNP are on 175 councillors. They're up 10. This, of course, is after a long time in government, so any gains for the SNP in this context will have to be seen as a very positive sign for them. Labour on 103, that's plus 6, so some gains for Labour too. The Independents are down 10. The Conservatives down 20 so far in Scotland. And we were certainly wanting to keep a sharp focus on the Tory performance in Scotland in terms of who might come second to the SNP in the overall contest. The Lib Dems up 7 in Scotland, and the Greens up 7. The Greens, of course, being partners in government with the SNP. If we look at the councils themselves, as opposed to the council seats, we have a part of the figures themselves. Let's have a look at the Independents on 3. Labour have gained a council. We'll talk about that in a second. No change for the SNP or the Conservatives or for the Lib Dems, and hung councils are 2. Right, I want to go to Glasgow and talk to my colleague there, Lindsay Bewes. Lindsay, bring us right up to date with what's going on in Glasgow and the trends as you see them.
Yeah, well, this is very much a battle between in Glasgow between the SNP and Labour. Labour losing control of this council for the first time in 40 years at the last election. The SNP going on to form a minority administration. So both of those parties seeking to emerge this time around as the largest party. For the SNP, that would cement their power in Scotland's biggest city. For Labour, well, it would help them in their quest to overtake the Scottish Conservatives as the party coming in second place in these elections, and it would also promote this idea of perhaps the beginnings of recovery for the party here in Scotland. Now, it is early days. We have 85 seats to declare. We've had only around a third of them declare so far. At the moment, it looks very close between the SNP and Labour. The SNP is holding its position. Labour has made a couple of gains from the SNP, though. The Tories, well, they have lost some of the seats that they gained at the last election. They did well in Glasgow, increasing the number of seats they held here last time. They've lost some of those seats already. And the Greens performing well. They have won a couple of seats. One notable result was the SNP council leader, Susan Aitken. Well, she lost out on that first preference vote win to the Green candidate in her ward. So the Greens celebrating here. They think they're doing very well as well.
Lindsay, when do you think we'll have a fuller picture in terms of the really key results there in Scotland? How is the count progressing where you are?
Well, we're expecting to have a much fuller picture, perhaps the whole picture of what's happening here in Glasgow at around 4, maybe 5 o'clock this afternoon. We should start to get a clearer picture of what is happening across Scotland as the afternoon goes on. And later on this afternoon, that should start to emerge much more fully. What we are seeing so far, though, the real story of this is the fall in the Conservative vote. Douglas Ross already has been attributing that to the issues around the so-called Partygate parties at Westminster, saying that has been a factor on the doorsteps. The Tories saying that a lot of their voters have stayed at home. The SNP, while they are still doing well, they are expected, of course, to emerge as the largest party. The real battle will be for second place, and Labour look like they are making gains there, particularly in the west of Scotland, and taking overall control of that council west and Bartonshire. That is not an easy thing to do in the system of proportional representation that we have in the elections here. So Labour will be celebrating gaining overall control of that council and hoping that those gains can continue. If the pattern does continue as it is just now, and I stress it is early days across the country, but that could see Labour overtaking the Tories into second place. The Tories suggesting that their voters are just not turning out to vote, and attributing that to what has been happening nationally and the issues at Westminster.
Lindsay, good to talk to you. We'll be back there in Glasgow later on to see exactly how the picture is forming up, but many thanks for now. So from Scotland, we're going to go to Wales, where there's a big test to see how Labour fights off challenges in certain parts of Wales, maybe from the Conservatives or Plaid Cymru or the Lib Dems in other areas. Daniel Davies is in Denbigh. Now, this is in northeast Wales. This is Red Wall territory, if you like, because Conservatives have made inroads there into old Labour territory. Daniel, how are things looking in Denbigh?
Well, it's nervous times for the Tories in many parts of Wales, including here in Denbigh. The local MP told us earlier that they faced a challenging election. One of his party colleagues was a bit more blunt, confiding in me that in Wynebu Quaid we're getting a thrashing in one part of the county where they hope to do well. And indeed, the results have come in thick and fast, and that has been borne out. The local Tory leader has lost his seat. There have been two Green councillors elected to the council for the first time, one of them with a landslide, both of them at the expense of Conservatives, but it's Labour who's been smiling the most. They've won a couple of key seats, and the local Labour Party says that they've treated this as a pivotal election, one where they have to do well because of the disappointment of the Senedd election last year. They lost a seat here, and the 2019 general election, where there was a clutch of what were thought to be safe-ish Labour seats that went to the Conservatives under Boris Johnson. And there are similar battles happening all over Wales, in the south, in Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. Labour and the Tories going at it there. In Monmouthshire, rock solid, safe Tory seat. There's talk that the Conservatives could lose control of that county, which would be a blow for them. 1,200 odd seats being contested across 22 local authorities, Huw, but so all sorts of plethora of local issues at play. But we are watching places like this to see, which way the mood is running in these kind of key battleground areas.
And just same as I asked Lindsay earlier, Daniel, just timings. What are the counts telling you, and what are you picking up anyway in terms of the likelihood of a really good picture emerging, let's say by 5 p.m? Is that asking too much?
Yeah, it could be by tea time. All of the counts are happening through the day here. Here in Denbigh, they've been rattling through them. Other places, it's a very incomplete picture. We've got no full declarations, no full set of results in it anywhere yet, although it looks like Plaid Cymru will hold on to its majority. In Gwynedd, no real surprise there. Plaid Cymru, incidentally, finding reasons to be cheerful in Carmarthenshire, where they're hoping to take control of that council, Labour being the main opponents there, and as with every election, hoping to make inroads, Plaid Cymru, into those Labour heartlands. Labour is by far the biggest party in local government in Wales. They had a pretty poor set of elections 5 years ago, losing 100 or so seats, so they'll be looking to regain councillors right across the country, particularly in their heartlands, in the valleys, where there have been difficulties with local factions here and there. I haven't spoken to anyone who thought that the Tories would hold on to all of their seats, having had a good night or good result in the local elections 5 years ago. It's more a question, really, of how many can they bear to lose and still say, well, that's a respectable result, given all the problems that Boris Johnson's government has faced at this midpoint in the parliamentary term.
Daniel, many thanks again. We'll be back there when we have more to report. But thanks for now. Daniel Davies there, our reporter in Denbigh, one of the interesting areas of Wales which could tell us what the state of the Conservatives is, certainly. And, of course, other parts will tell us how Labour is faring against some of the opposition parties, given Labour's dominance in government in Wales, in Cardiff. Now, earlier, as we came on, I was telling you about the breaking news from Durham Police that they're looking again at the circumstances of a gathering involving Sir Keir Starmer and some party workers. It's been loosely called Beergate because there was beer and curry involved. And our reporter, Judith Moritz, actually is in Carlisle, where Sir Keir has been visiting. He's been there congratulating party workers on some of their wins overnight. So let's take a look at this.
Have you heard from Durham Police, Sir Keir? Any comment on their investigation? Have you heard from the police, Sir Keir?
So a resolute silence there from Sir Keir as he makes his way into what looks to be like the railway station in Carlisle. And as we look at these images, this was just a short while ago. Vicky's with me, and yes, a pretty stony silence there, Vicky. And I suppose that they'll prepare a statement later on, which I think we can safely predict will be, let's see what the police come up with in their investigation and we'll cooperate.
Yeah, I mean, they must be pretty upset about the timing of all of this. This is an event that took place in June 2021, and it happened in Durham. Now, it was all part of campaigning. Sir Keir Starmer was there with colleagues. They were gathered together in an office, and then through the window was a picture taken of him drinking a beer. And we know that a curry was ordered, and they were stopping, they say, for a break in between working very long hours. So it was April 2021, not June. I think the problem for Sir Keir Starmer here is that, of course, he has attacked, understandably, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, for what went on in Downing Street. Those two, of course, have actually been fined. They've been found to have been guilty of breaking the rules that they themselves wrote. And there have been dozens of other fines issued to people working in Downing Street at the time. But now, of course, the attention turning to him and what he was doing. At the time, we were in Tier 2 restrictions, so there was no indoor socialising allowed. And what the police in Durham will be looking at is whether it was reasonably necessary for work for Sir Keir Starmer and his colleagues to be eating and drinking together in that room. So that's what they will have to answer. That's what it says. Now, reasonably necessary, you know, you can see some toing and froing might go on there about whether it was or not the time of night. Could they have gone somewhere else? Were they really working? All of these questions will now have to be asked. And of course, for Sir Keir Starmer, he does paint himself in contrast to the Prime Minister. He has talked a lot about the Prime Minister's integrity and about the fact that he was, bringing the office of Prime Minister into disrepute because he was being investigated by the police at all. So for the Labour leader now to himself be under investigation is, no doubt about it, politically incredibly embarrassing.
If we get more, we'll bring it to you straight away. Of course we will, and might even be trying to catch up with Sir Keir when he returns to London, if that's indeed where he is returning to on the train from Carlisle. Now then, we've talked about Scotland, we've talked about Wales, just to set the scene for us before the flood of results comes in those two countries. But Northern Ireland, of course, presents a different challenge today, a challenge in terms of trying to see what the future holds for Northern Ireland in terms of its governance, in terms of the makeup of the Assembly there, and whether there is indeed the potential for Sinn Fein to nominate a First Minister at Stormont, depending on the results themselves. So it's a multi-level picture, as it always is in Northern Ireland, and trying to unpick all the various potential patterns that we're likely to see. But that's why we've got Anita McVeigh on standby with her expertise and guests as well. So, Anita, over to you to tell us a little more about what to expect.
Thank you very much, Huw. And yes, you're absolutely right. So many interesting stories and nuances here in this election campaign. No one elected yet. Let me just establish that first of all. This election is about returning 90 members of the Power Sharing Assembly at Stormont, and also about deciding which two parties have the right to nominate to the positions of First Minister and Deputy First Minister. Now, whether all of that happens after this election, that's been one of the big talking points of this, because of course of the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party's opposition to the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that's the set of rules, of course, that governs post-Brexit trade here in Northern Ireland. Let me just set the scene a little bit here. I'm at one of the three count centres in Northern Ireland. This is the Titanic Exhibition Centre in Belfast. So behind me, they're counting the seats for South Down and Strangford, and also the four Belfast constituencies, North, South, East and West. And the voting system here is a form of proportional representation, the single transferable vote. So that makes for a really interesting count, and lots and lots and lots of rounds of counting before we eventually get those 90 seats filled. Before I talk to my guest, let me just tell you about a few key things to look out for. Will Sinn Fein emerge as the largest party with the right to nominate the position of First Minister? Also, watch out for the cross-community alliance parties vote. Early indications say that they are doing really well, and that's interesting because for so long in Northern Ireland, politics has been boxed into people either being green or orange, nationalist or unionist, but this rise of the centre ground is something to look out for. And thirdly, watch out for how the TUV do, that's traditional unionist voice, anti-protocol party. Will they take seats away from the DUP, and how could that lead to the positioning of the parties when we get those final numbers? Well, joining me now is the former BBC Northern Ireland political editor Mark Devonport, who has reported on some of the biggest stories here, such as the IRA ceasefire, the Good Friday Agreement. Mark, it's great to have you with us and your expertise.
Thank you, Anita. Lovely to be here.
What's been catching your eye so far?
Well, as you say, we haven't got any official results yet, so we have to put a health warning in terms of everything we're hearing right now. But a lot of these candidates and their officials have been walking around making unofficial tallies, and some of these party workers have been doing that for years, and those unofficial tallies are surprisingly accurate. The picture that is emerging from that is that Sinn Féin appear to be quietly confident that they've kept their vote together, they've held it and maybe even grown it in some places. And that should be enough for them to claim that all-important top spot and become First Minister. Now, the importance of that is that if you go back a full 100 years, Northern Ireland was actually created in order to create a comfortable pro-British unionist majority. And certainly over the last 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, a unionist party of one kind or the other has always held the top spot and held that position. So it is a seismic change if you have a party which is Irish Republican, dedicated to abolishing this place, Northern Ireland, and making it part of a united Ireland, actually the largest party occupying that post at Stormont Castle. Even though officially the First Minister and Deputy First Ministers have the same powers, it's still very important symbolically.
Yeah, absolutely. And another big question is, after this election, will there, of course, actually be a functioning government, or will it be a continuing Stormont stalemate as we've had for so much of the time since the last Assembly election?
We have had stalemates during the last 25 years over all manner of questions, initially paramilitary disarmament, more recently a fallout over the management of a renewable heating scheme, which was a bit of a new one for Northern Ireland politics. But it looks quite likely we're going to go into one of those logjam periods again, probably over the course of the next 6 months, whereby we might, under new legislation that's been passed, have caretaker ministers that will still carry on in place, but we won't have an effective power-sharing executive. Why? Because unionism, I think, will be in a bit of turmoil, partly because they've lost the top spot, and partly because the reason the DUP has lost the top spot is there's a fragmentation within the unionist community, especially over the controversial post-Brexit arrangements, which some of the more hardline unionists have been arguing makes Northern Ireland less British. And one aspect of this election we'll be looking for is growth in that small party, the traditional unionists, which recently has been a one-man party, but now looks like it's going to have more than one candidate taken back to Stormont. And we're seeing various other politicians. That's Naomi Long, who's the leader of the cross-community party, who's just making her way into this count centre.
I hope you can, I'm not sure if you can, yeah, you can just see her, Naomi Long, her party officials clapping their hands. They are looking very, very happy at the minute. So we'll try and grab a word with her if we can, or someone else from the party. Mark, thank you so much.
Within the complex picture, they've been doing pretty well.
Absolutely. Mark, thank you so much. Mark Devonport. Great to hear Mark's thoughts. So I mentioned a few things that you can look out for. It's going to take, I think, until very late tonight, possibly into the early hours of tomorrow morning, before we get the full and final picture. For the moment, back to you, Huw.
Anita, thanks very much, and to Mark as well, of course, and we will indeed be back as soon as we can. The time is just about 2:15, and on this election day, local elections in England, Scotland and Wales, assembly elections in Northern Ireland, we are now in a position to share with you the projected national share of the vote, and this is the moment that lots of you wait for. Quite rightly, we do as well, because this is a yardstick, a reliable yardstick of performance in an election which has lots of moving parts and is very difficult to compare like with like very often. So the projected national share helps us to do that. Now, before I unveil the figures, I'm going to bring in the man who's in charge of the magic formula, and that is Sir John Curtis. And John, can we just explain to viewers once again, before we reveal the figures, what this PNS, as we call it, signifies?
Well, one of the difficulties with local elections in England, of course, is that not everywhere votes at every one time, and indeed not all the parties fight all seats. So what we're doing with this is saying, well, let's try to work out what would have happened if not only the all of England, but also all of Scotland and all of Wales had voted yesterday, and that in so doing they had behaved in line with the behaviour that is evident in the local election results we do have for England. So in a sense, it's not an attempt to forecast the general election result. It's not even saying what we think would happen if there'd been a general election yesterday. It's an estimate of how well the parties have done in these local elections, an estimate which, because it's projected in the same way from year to year, then gives you a measure that enables us to compare the performance of the parties from one local election year to another.
John, thank you. I'll be back straight away for your thoughts on the actual figures. Let's bring the figures on screen. Election day 2022, the projected national share from the BBC. Labour on 35%. The Conservatives on 30%, the Lib Dems on 19%, and the others, including the Greens, of course, on 16%. Now, that means that Labour have clearly won the election, in that sense, 5 points ahead of the Conservatives. They've matched their 2018 share. It's worth underlining that. It's their biggest lead over the Conservatives since 2012, 10 years ago. And the Lib Dems have matched their 2019 share as well. Lots of people watching, John, will want your thoughts on what this signifies. And given that I've just said that Labour have won this particular election, is it a good springboard for them for a future general election?
OK, well, let's take the three main parties in turn. So far as the Conservatives are concerned, if we leave aside the very exceptional local elections of 2019, when both Conservative and Labour lost ground very heavily in the midst of the furore over the Brexit negotiations and what should be done about Brexit. Apart from that, this is the lowest estimated Conservative share in any set of local elections since before the EU referendum. So to that extent, at least, it's perhaps an indication to the party that Brexit might have delivered for it for quite a while, but there is no guarantee that it will continue to deliver for it in the future, even though Brexit itself has now been delivered. And certainly this is a pretty clear indication that the Conservatives are certainly now in relatively choppy electoral waters for the first time since the 2019 general election. Secondly, Labour. Well, yes, we are saying that if you take together what happened in London and what happened outside of London, Labour's performance is more or less the equivalent of what happened in 2018. But it does mean, therefore, that Labour can't claim, at least according to our figures, that their performance this year was better than every single local election performance by Jeremy Corbyn, because the 35% that Labour got in 2018 was achieved under Jeremy Corbyn. So insofar as I think Sir Keir Starmer has wanted to make it clear he can reach parts of the electorate that Jeremy Corbyn couldn't, that still seems to be a work in progress. Finally, the Liberal Democrats. Well, this isn't a record performance for them, but it does match the performance of 2019 when their boat was floated by, again, that row about Brexit that dominated the local elections at that time. But together with the 2019 election result, this does represent the Liberal Democrats' best local election performance at any other set of local elections since the party made that fateful decision back in 2010 to enter into coalition with the Conservatives and fairly promptly reaped an electoral whirlwind of retribution, not least as a result of their volte-face on tuition fees. So certainly encouragement for the Liberal Democrats that perhaps at least they might now be positioned where they can perhaps begin to leave the travails of the coalition behind. Encouraging for Labour, certainly as you said, that is their largest lead over the Conservatives in the local elections since 2012. But, it's nothing spectacular for an opposition in local elections in the middle of a parliament. And for the Conservatives, very clearly a warning that the electorate cannot be taken for granted, and that although indeed the party's not lost that many seats and not many councils, although the number of councils keeps on gradually creeping up, they do need to recognise they're in a markedly weaker position than the local elections last year. Indeed, they're 6 points down on our estimate from where they were then.
The others on 16, including the Greens, John, and we've been reporting on Green gains overnight and during the morning. So a word about the Greens' performance.
Yeah, weren't attempting to estimate the Greens because the Greens don't fight enough wards to make that viable. But certainly the Greens have gained 4 points on their position in 2018. They've been doubling the number of seats that they represent. It's not a record Green performance. Again, we get back to that exceptional election of 2019. The Greens did a bit better than they did this year. But a reminder, certainly, and a confirmation of the evidence of the opinion polls, that the Greens are not players that can be ignored in future for Westminster elections. They may not necessarily be capable of winning in those, although they've certainly won seats in these local elections. But insofar as they potentially can take votes from the other parties, then it is a force that all the other parties certainly need to take cognizance of.
So I'm just going to very unfairly pick out two phrases, John, for those viewers who are just joining us and having seen that this projected national share is showing Labour on 35, Conservatives on 30, Lib Dems on 19 and the others, including the Greens, on 16. Your summary would be, I hope this is right, the Conservatives find themselves in choppy electoral waters and Labour find themselves in a position where their results are nothing spectacular. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's perfectly reasonable. And the Liberal Democrats have made modest but potentially important progress.
Thank you very much, John, as ever. And we'll be back with you later for thoughts as they come along. And Vicky, what did you make of that?
I think it's interesting because there's a pattern, isn't there, that's coming, particularly in England, where there are lots of councils, not all of them necessarily going to other parties like Labour or the Liberal Democrats, but where the Conservatives are losing control, and then within specific wards in areas which, for example, the Liberal Democrats are targeting. So, for example, somewhere like Dominic Raab's constituency, the Justice Secretary, the Liberal Democrats are making gains there, and that's how they think they can claw their way back, and eventually, they hope, win parliamentary seats. So there are going to be an awful lot of very nervous Conservative MPs watching these results coming in across southern England, whether it's in Somerset, whether it's in Maidstone, whether it's in Worthing, where we think Labour have taken control of Worthing for the first time ever. It looks like that Conservative vote is being slowly eroded. Now, I think it's not dramatic enough for there to be a coup against the Prime Minister at this point. We know there are lots of his MPs who are very unhappy, but they will be assessing whether he is still a winner for them. That's what they care about.
Well, look, shall we put that question to Simon Clarke, the Treasury Minister, the Conservative MP, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Mr Clarke, thanks very much for joining us. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Well, what would be your response to Vicky's assertion there that there will be colleagues of yours asking serious questions about whether you do have the right leadership looking ahead maybe a year or two. What's your thought on that?
Well, it's not been an easy night or day for the Conservative Party, but it's certainly not been a particularly unusual set of mid-term elections for a sitting government, as John Curtis was just setting out. And certainly, for my part, I'm very clear that we should be getting right behind the Prime Minister, the man who's made the right calls on a whole host of issues since he came in. Obviously, the country's been confronted with a series of massive challenges, first implementing Brexit in the face of a hung parliament, and then overcoming COVID, and now dealing with the situation with Russia and Ukraine. The Prime Minister has consistently made the right calls at the right times on the biggest issues, and I'm clear the great majority of Conservative MPs want to focus on the real issue, which is, of course, delivering on national recovery and on the commitments we made in 2019, which is ultimately what we will be judged on when we have a general election, likely in 2024.
Mr. Clarke, overnight we spoke to lots of Conservatives, and certainly those in authorities where the party had suffered losses, in one or two cases, really bad losses. And they were very clear. They said, yes, of course there are local issues, but the Prime Minister's name did come up a lot and his reputation came up a lot, and it wasn't helpful. And that was a factor in the defeats that they were mentioning. Now, in your readout there to do with the Prime Minister and making the right calls, where does the character issue fit in? Is it not a relevant one, do you think?
Well, look, this has been a difficult backdrop to the campaign, and we've had the news about Durham Police and Keir Starmer today, which gives a taste, if you like, of the experience that the Conservatives have had over recent weeks. And there is no denying, the Prime Minister himself would not deny that this was an issue during the campaign, and he has rightly and repeatedly apologised for what happened in Downing Street and set in train a series of reforms to make certain there could never be any repeat. And I know that his feelings on this are extremely heartfelt and genuine. So look, his views are clearly out there. The apology he's made repeatedly has been clearly stated, and this is something which undoubtedly overshadowed the campaign. But is it the only factor in play? No, of course it is not. We face a variety of global pressures resulting from the impact of the pandemic and now war in Europe. That would make it a difficult backdrop for any sitting government. The key message of today is that whilst the government undoubtedly has lessons to learn and a newfound focus on delivery is required, Labour have not convinced people that they are in a fit condition to be the next government. Oh,
Mr. Clarke has left. I think, to be fair to him, he didn't leave. I think his link went down. That was Simon Clarke, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and I was about to ask him, Vicky, about the response to the rising cost of living and the fact that lots of his colleagues in the party overnight were saying, well, the Treasury's response hasn't been sufficient, and the Chancellor needs to be making a much bigger effort to help people with higher energy bills and all the rest of it, given that inflation's heading for 10% and given that there's a recession possibly around the corner. Do we have Mr. Clarke back? No, we don't. So just a word on that, because how vulnerable is that flank?
I think that will be a huge test for the government. And when you listen to Boris Johnson, he says that these results are a bit patchy, but he wants to get on with the job. And then he talks about what he feels has gone well. So him delivering Brexit, the COVID vaccinations, and his leadership on Ukraine. But I think it's getting to the point now, we're getting near enough to the next general election, where actually what happens in terms of how he delivers from now on all those things he's talked about, like levelling up, but particularly the cost of living, are really what is going to dictate his leadership and probably the result of the next election. OK, well,
Mr. Clarke, you're back with us. That's good. Thank you very much. Apologies for the whatever caused that. Anyway, I was just about to say, Simon, on this business about the cost of living crisis, that again, lots of your party colleagues were telling us overnight that the response from the government, and you are sitting there, as a minister in the Treasury, you're right at the heart of this response, that the response has not been adequate. It needs more. It can't wait until the autumn. You've got a recession possibly around the corner and inflation running towards 10%. People are struggling with energy bills. Your response so far, yes, has been noted, but it needs to be far more assertive. Now, will that response be evident sooner rather than later?
Well, we are keenly aware of the pressures on family finances resulting from some of the global pressures that we know we're facing. And that's why we've put in place a £22 billion package for this year to support families. And that includes action on national insurance. And by July, 70% of people will be paying less national insurance than they were before, even accounting for the new health and social care levy to deal with NHS backlogs. We've taken action to raise the national living wage, to cut the taper rate for universal credit so that lower earners get to keep more of the money they earn. These are all things which we're doing to try and make sure that we protect family finances. And clearly there will be a budget in the autumn at which the Chancellor will look again at the options at our disposal. But it is really important to emphasise that we have to be aware both of the fact that we've put £22 billion worth of support in place, but crucially that we're paying £83 billion a year at the moment to service our debt interest after the pandemic. And that is something which, if we don't keep under control, will threaten the public finances in a way which would have a direct impact on public services. So whilst we absolutely recognise that we need to keep the situation under close review, we also have a duty to the public not to lose control of the public finances in a way which will be bad for everyone.
I'm just thinking, Mr. Clarke, that on the basis of the people who spoke to us last night, Conservatives at counts where they'd suffered losses, that message, is not going to be that welcome. You seem to be saying, let's wait for the budget in the autumn. Let's see how this 22 billion package beds down. We don't want to take any more measures in the meantime. We're concerned about debt. And, lots of your colleagues were saying to us, people need help right now. It's not enough. And by the autumn will be too late, not just in terms of your party and what damage it might cause that, but more importantly, people's own well-being, people's own welfare. So do you think you're moving quickly enough here? And when you say that you are understanding people's problems, is the nature of your response backing that up?
Yeah, I absolutely think we do have a strong package of support in place, which isn't to say, as I was saying, that we don't keep these issues under close review. And if there are opportunities to help people, that we won't take them. But it is absolutely the case that the biggest single issue confronting families with inflationary pressures is the cost of energy. And the main focus of that will come in the autumn when the next iteration of the energy price cap falls due. And clearly, energy use is lower during the summer anyway. The main moment when family finances will come under pressure from any change in the price cap would be the autumn. That is a major focus in my mind. But it is the case that we have to make sure, as I say, that we are doing the right thing by the national finances, because everybody will be worse off here if we lose control in a way which would threaten the sustainability of public services. We've spent £400 billion responding to the COVID pandemic. The consequences of that are, as I say, that we're spending £83 billion a year now servicing our debt. And that money is real, and it is a harsh reality, but one which the government has to be aware of, that it does limit our room for manoeuvre, and it therefore means we have to be really targeted in terms of the response that we make to these pressures.
Mr. Clarke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Simon Clarke, Conservative MP and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Our thanks to him. So we'll return in a moment to the projected national share of the vote, which is the headline shares that John Curtis shared with us earlier on. We'll be getting response of the other parties to what the projected national share tells us at this point. But we'll take a break. We're going to catch up with all the day's news now. And it's hello to Martine. Hi, Martine.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much. Here's a summary of the BBC News. Durham police have confirmed that they will investigate the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer over allegations that he broke lockdown rules.
Have you heard from Durham Police, Sir Keir? Any comment on their investigation?
He was pictured drinking beer with colleagues while campaigning before last year's Hartlepool by-election. Sir Keir has insisted no rules were broken and dismissed the allegations as mudslinging. Durham Constabulary previously said that they did not intend to take action over the allegation, but officers say they have now received significant new information. A reminder, if you want to find out the election results in your area, head to the BBC News website or the BBC News app and enter your postcode. You'll also find lots of election analysis and the latest reports from our teams around the country. But now it's back to election 2022 and Huw.
Yes, welcome back to the BBC's election studio. Keeping tabs on those results still coming in from the English local authorities. 107 councils declared out of 146, so making very good progress in that direction. And of course, waiting for more results to come in from Scotland. The pattern in Wales yet to be established. And a similar message in Northern Ireland, where the bulk of the results will come later on today and into tomorrow morning. So let's get right up to date with the latest results in from the English local councils and join Reeta.
Huw, thank you. Here are 3 local councils that have come in very recently, and I want to focus really on Labour's performance in England. Using these 3 councils as an illustration. So Wakefield in West Yorkshire, that is a Labour hold. That's interesting in itself, but also there is due to be a by-election at some stage in Wakefield after the Conservative MP Imran Ahmed Khan stepped down after a sex conviction. And what is interesting in Wakefield is that although it's a Labour hold, they haven't actually progressed in terms of the number of seats. They have remained static. Is there a read-through there to what is likely to happen in the by-election? We shall see. It's a different story in the 2 West Sussex councils here. Crawley, which is a Labour gain from no overall control, and Worthing, similarly a Labour gain. Crawley, Labour had been neck and neck with the Conservatives until today. They've now gone ahead and gained it. And let's just look at what's been happening. Let me try again. In Worthing, because this is good news for Labour. They have hit the winning post. They've got 20 seats. They needed 19 to win. And although they're still counting, it's worth our looking at, I beg your pardon, what's happened to the seat change. So the Conservatives have lost 3, Lib Dems have lost 1, and that's to the advantage of Labour. And as always, the share change, that is the overall share, Labour rather higher than the Conservatives, but it's the change in the share of the vote since last time these seats were fought that's always so interesting. And look at that, Labour really storming ahead there, 12 percentage points up at the expense of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. So hold those thoughts about the differences in performance in the north of England and the south of England, because I want to show you a comparison. Here we have it. So this is the change in the share of the vote for the main parties since these seats were last up in 2018. And I'll just come over here to show you that in the south of England, remember the West Sussex seats, Labour is advancing, not storming ahead, but it is progressing. It's up by 1 percentage point, and the Conservatives have dropped. Actually, the Lib Dems and the Greens are doing even better there. In the north of England, for Labour, it's a different story. They've gone down by 2 percentage points, along with the Conservatives, and that will be very troubling for Sir Keir Starmer's party, because Labour needs to win back those Tory voters, those new Tory voters who deserted them in 2019, if they are ever to get back into power. And on the basis of this, so far, doesn't look like it's happening.
Interesting, Reeta. Many thanks. And Reeta there pinpointing quite a few results, but Worthing among them. And Vicky, we were chatting just a short while ago before we came on air. I think it's worth just rerunning some of the conversation we had, because is there a danger when you see what's happened in Worthing, for example, as an example of the south of England, is there a danger of underplaying the kind of performance the Lib Dems have put in, especially, and indeed the poor result for the Conservatives in quite a few of these areas? You know, this Lib Dem Tory interplay in some of these areas has been, very marked.
Yeah, it has. And the Liberal Democrats call it the blue wall. Now, you remember we've had those stunning by-election wins for them, places like Chesham and Amersham, which, would have been absolutely rock-solid Conservative seats, North Shropshire another. And in those by-elections, the Conservatives have done really well. Now, by-elections are one thing. Other elections can be more tricky, but I think what they feel they're showing here is that not just in those places, but across quite large parts of the south of England, they are making inroads. Now, sometimes they're gaining control of the council, other times they might just be taking a few seats here and there, but they are in seats where they would hope, when it comes to the parliamentary elections, that they can build on all of that. And they certainly think, I think in Somerset, which we haven't had the result of yet, but the Lib Dems not far off taking control of that too. And then if Labour is taking places like Worthing for the first time ever, Peter Kyle, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, saying that they are absolutely jubilant there because 5 years ago, Labour didn't have a single councillor in that area. Places like Southampton, which the Labour Party is taking. I think the Tories are going to be a little bit nervous. Yes, they are holding up in some places, but by the end of today, you're going to be looking at the Tories losing seats in Scotland, Wales and England.
I think that just the narrative around the south of England, because it's such an important electoral area when it comes to Westminster and for the Conservatives' own prospects, if you have Labour making gains in places like Worthing and then the Lib Dems in the West Country, that begins to look like a pincer movement, which could really damage the Tories in the longer term. Yeah,
and that's why the Conservatives themselves were so upset as what they saw as an informal pact between Labour and the Lib Dems, because they know that whether it's formal, informal, whatever, or if it's just tactical voting because people have got used to the first past the post system, if people decide they want to punish the Conservatives, then they have learnt how to do it in certain seats. Now, that can be incredibly dangerous for the Conservatives. So even though the national share of the vote might not be as clear, it does mean that in certain areas that can be damaging for them. And so lots of Conservative MPs who are under pressure from the Liberal Democrats and in other places under pressure from Labour will be pretty concerned about all of that. And just an update, the Lib Dems have taken overall control of Somerset Council. That's a new unitary authority. Somerset, important, of course, to the Liberal Democrats. Paddy Ashdown, it was his land. All through the southwest, of course, at one point, the Liberal Democrats incredibly strong, but driven back after the coalition and partly because of Brexit. And now they would say that they're clawing their way back. And that, of course, is lots and lots of Conservative MPs sitting there and a potential by-election, of course, a by-election coming. We don't know yet when, in the Devon seat where Neil Parish has resigned. Yeah, and just to underline, Vicky, that is one of there are a few very big new authorities that have come in based on an amalgam of some old authorities, and Somerset is one of them. Another battleground we want to talk about. Let's go and talk about the West Midlands, traditionally, of course, packed with seats, which are crucial to the result of general elections. Let's have a look at the 12 of the 14 councils declared so far, because this is what it means in terms of councillors: 100 to Labour, up 2. The Tories on 84, down 7. The Greens just up 1, the Lib Dems up 3, and the Independents up 1. Let's have a look at councils then, because that's probably more significant in one sense. The Tories have lost control of one council. That's in Worcester, I think. And then Labour are on 3, and they haven't changed. They have control of 3. The Greens, Lib Dems and Independents have none. And there's one hung council. That's because Worcester, I think if we look at Worcester, it's a Conservative loss of control. They're on 15, Labour on 12. They're short by 3, the Tories there. And I think if we look at the change of seats, there we see it. The Tories have lost 3 seats, which has led to this loss of control. Labour, Greens and Lib Dems up 1 apiece. Let's go to Birmingham to have a talk about the West Midlands, and our political editor there, Elizabeth Glinker. Elizabeth, tell us a little more about the picture there as you see it and what it tells us about the prospects for the coming few years.
Yes, Huw. Well, here in Birmingham, the count is very much still ongoing. This is a huge council, 101 seats, and it is in fact all out. So far we've had 40 of the 101 seats, so a long way to go here. Labour have been running this council for the last 10 years, and we're not expecting a change really in Birmingham, but there are some interesting results coming in. So the Greens doing quite well, holding their seats and taking at least one from Labour at the moment. And elsewhere, Labour taking back seats from the Conservatives, which are in parts of the city which perhaps more closely resemble areas of the Red Wall in terms of demographics. So that's an interesting development. There has been a lot of attention on the former Red Wall areas, so those big urban councils around Birmingham, what we call the Black Country. Lots of attention on those. However, those councils only up by thirds, so the numbers, the arithmetic meant that we really weren't going to see too many changes there. However, we were keen to see what happened to the share of the Labour vote and if we could start to see some kind of recovery there. Well, I can tell you, we said we didn't think there were going to be changes, and that has been borne out. So Coventry a Labour hold, Wolverhampton a Labour hold, Walsall a Conservative hold, Solihull a Conservative hold, Dudley a Conservative hold, all areas where the Conservatives have been doing well in parliamentary elections over recent years. I should say in Dudley, interestingly, Labour doing the best they have done since 2016, so perhaps some signs of a bit of a Labour recovery in that part of the Black Country. Similarly, Sandwell, a Labour hold, they run that council, but in the last set of local elections, the Conservatives took 9 seats there. This time, that's not the case. Now, Labour haven't necessarily made any further gains, but they have stopped the Conservatives making progress, and that is an area which now 3 out of the 4 MPs in that area, once rock-solid Labour, where Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, had his seat, 3 of those 4 MPs now Conservative. So Labour have a lot of work to do there, and perhaps you could argue that is a sign of this. Elsewhere in the West Midlands, you mentioned Worcester before. That is interesting. Traditionally, Worcester is a real bellwether for the whole of England. It flips back and forth. The way Worcester votes tends to indicate the way the rest of Middle England will vote. As you said, the Conservatives there, they had a 1-seat majority. They've lost that. They've lost 3 seats, which means that council is back in no overall control. Again, the Greens doing quite well there. The Greens may have the balance of power in Worcester. We think that we could see some kind of coalition potentially between Labour and the Greens there. And elsewhere in the region, another area to look for is Newcastle-under-Lyme in North Staffordshire. Lots of attention focused on this area. It's right next to Stoke-on-Trent, prime Red Wall. And that council has been run by the Conservatives for the last year, again with a very slim majority of just 1. And it has been a very tight race there. The area got a Conservative MP for the first time in 2019, Aaron Bell. He and the rest of the Conservatives in that area have been pounding the streets over the last week. He tweeted yesterday he'd done 40,000 steps on the campaign trail. So a really tight race there. And what we are hearing at the moment, of the 44 seats, 22 have come back so far, 11 Labour, 11 Conservative. Now in the room it's sounding like it's the Tories who are feeling more positive. They think they may have just done enough to hold on to that seat. And if that is the case, that will be a huge disappointment for Labour, a huge disappointment for Keir Starmer in that kind of push to try and recover those seats in the Red Wall.
Elizabeth, fascinating as ever. Thank you so much. We'll be back with you later on to see what's going on in the West Midlands and, of course, in Birmingham at that count where you are. Let's go from the West Midlands to the northwest of England. And we've got Annabel Tiffin for us in Bury, who's going to join us. There we have some of the northwest statistics with 20 of 25 councils declared, with Labour up modestly 4 seats so far and the Tories down 22. Annabel, in Bury, how do things look?
Well, they only started to count here probably about an hour and a half ago. They're looking probably to get the first results at around 4 o'clock, they think, because they haven't got as many. It is an all-out election, so they have got quite a lot of wards to add up, but not like last time when they had the mayors as well. It's quite interesting here because I noticed Elizabeth was talking about bellwether seats, and this is always considered a bellwether seat as well in general elections, but of course this is local elections, so can it be here? Well, to give you an indication of how important this seat is politically to both parties of Labour and to the Tories, Labour launched their local election campaign back here in Bury, and the Conservatives, well, Boris Johnson was only here just a week or so ago, so both are really keen on taking this seat. It is actually a Labour-held seat, and Labour will wish to consolidate on that lead, but the Conservatives will be wishing to make gains. But what's interesting is that here in Bury there is another group, as well as the Liberal Democrats, there's another group called Radcliffe First, which concentrates, it's really just one ward in Bury, and a lot of people that live there have voted for them and have said they'll vote for them because it's very, very local, and that's what matters to them. So although we're talking about bellwether seats here, it is a local election, so people have been voting on local issues. So for instance, do they think that their local council has been doing enough for them? And also it's things like the clean air zone charge. A lot of people in Greater Manchester have been very unhappy about that. So it will be interesting to see what happens. Parliamentary wise, as I said, this one tends to go back and forth, but at the last election it was won by two Conservatives with very, very small majorities. Bury North, I think, has the smallest majority in the whole of the country. It's something like 103. And then you will remember that Christian Wakeford, who won Bury South for the Conservatives, he then defected to Labour. So it is one of those seats that everybody will be keeping an eye on. As I said, I think we'll be expecting to get the results at about 3 o'clock. Elsewhere, though, the big story probably is Rossendale. Now, Rossendale, Labour have taken control. They lost control there last time, but they did actually win it this time, although everywhere else, although no councils have actually changed seats apart from Rossendale, Labour will be breathing a sigh of relief about Rossendale because they really hadn't been doing quite as well as expected. Oldham in particular, although they remain in control there, they actually lost 5 seats, including their leader, Aruj Shah, who was the first Muslim woman to lead a northern council.
Annabelle, thanks so much for the update. A lot of information packed in there, very useful. Thank you very much. Annabelle Tiffin there in Bury. We're getting some results in from Wales. Let's have a look at this in Wrexham in North East Wales. This very much part of the Red Wall phenomenon, where the Conservatives have been making inroads into old Labour territory. But let's look at what's happening there. The Independents' big group in Wrexham Council, Labour on 14, Plaid Cymru on 9, which is interesting, and the Tories on 9. The reason I'm saying it's interesting, if we look at the change, we'll see what's happened. The Independents down 5, Labour up 3, which will be a bit of relief to them, but a very significant rise for Plaid Cymru, up 6 seats in Wrexham, Tories down 3, and the Lib Dems down 1. Wrexham being, of course, a Conservative Westminster constituency now. For many, many, many years, it was in Labour hands. So with that result, just that result there, not many results come in yet from Wales, but I'd like to bring in the leader of Plaid Cymru, who is Adam Price. Pranawda, Adam, nice of you to join us. Thank you very much. Well, I mentioned Wrexham. You've made 6 seat gains there. Was that expected?
Yes, I mean, a fantastic result. I was up there in Wrexham campaigning myself, and it was clear that we were going to make a huge progress there. As you said, trebling our position compared to 5 years ago. And what's interesting as well here is that, a very diverse and inclusive range of candidates. Over 60% of them women, and reflecting, I think, what we want to do across Wales, which has become a diverse and inclusive party representing the whole of Wales. Plaid Cymru means the party of Wales. We want to be the party of the whole of Wales, and if we can do it in Wrexham, then that's a model for us as we look forward to the next set of elections. So it's incredibly heartening for us to see that growth for Plaid Cymru in an area where urban, largely English-speaking Wales that hasn't been a traditional stronghold for us. If we can do it in Wrexham, we can do it in every part of Wales.
Just bear with us, Adam. I've got numbers here from Gwynedd, which obviously is of interest to you, especially because of your parliamentary representation there in Cardiff and in Westminster. 44 seats to Plaid Cymru, 23 to the Independents, traditionally quite a big group on Gwynedd Council. Labour on 1, the Lib Dems on 1, the Conservatives on none. A majority of 19. What's happened there? Let's have a look at the change. Plaid up 4, the Independents down 3, Labour down 1. So Gwynedd, yes, traditionally a stronghold of yours. Were you expecting to add to your tally there?
Yes, and it's great to see the two things happening, isn't it? Growth in new areas, but also consolidation and indeed further growth in the areas where we've traditionally been strong. And the interesting thing in Gwynedd as well, to pick up on the point that I made earlier, we got a huge number of younger candidates, particularly young women, standing for us. We made a particular push this time to get more women candidates, more young people standing, and we've had a sort of generational change, if you like, in Gwynedd in this election. Fantastic to see young, energetic women candidates elected in Gwynedd. That augurs very well for us in the future in those western areas of Wales where we are strong, and we're doing well here in Carmarthenshire as well. It's incredible. I'm from Ammanford, as you know, Huw, and we won the 2 seats in the town. We won 5 seats in Carmarthen town. These areas, which traditionally would have been strongholds for the Labour Party, we've seen a generational shift over the last 2 decades in Carmarthenshire towards Plaid Cymru, and that's been strengthened again at this election.
The dynamics of the campaign are interesting for those who watch, how parties work together or oppose each other. You've had a close relationship now with Labour in power in Cardiff Bay because you've been cooperating with them, and yet, of course, you're campaigning against Labour in local authorities where, traditionally there's been quite a bit of friction between Plaid Cymru and Labour. How has that played out? And are people rather confused about the fact that you might be facing two ways?
Actually, the opposite, really. People have welcomed what we've been able to achieve through the cooperation agreement, the policy of universal free school meals for primary school children, for example, free childcare for all 2-year-olds for the first time ever in Wales, and action on the housing crisis. And for many voters, this has been an opportunity for them to take another look at Plaid Cymru, if you like, and it's kind of crystallised what Plaid Cymru is all about for a new generation and new groups of supporters. So it's been a great conversation starter on the doorstep. And when people are looking at the state of politics in Westminster at the moment, they see this kind of cooperative politics in Wales, where a total contrast from the sort of aggressive adversarialism of Westminster as refreshingly different. So I think it's been positive for us. But yes, of course, we may be cooperating in the Senedd in certain areas, but First Minister himself has been here in Carmarthenshire, campaigning very hard. Carmarthenshire was a key target. They were briefing in very strongly that they were going to reverse the position here with their losses that I referred to over the last 2 decades. They've made no impact whatsoever, and that'll be a great source of disappointment to them.
Well, we may talk to Welsh Labour a little later. Adam, thank you very much for now. Adam Price, the leader of Plaid Cymru, our thanks to him. It's coming up to 3 o'clock. We're going to take a break now to look at the weather, and it's with Thomas today. Now, these elections decide who runs local services, of course. They're also a crucial test of what people think of our political leaders. And right across the UK, the results now are flooding in. Labour look to be heading for a narrow lead in the national share of the vote. But Keir Starmer's party's won some stunning victories in London, taking control of Worthing in West Sussex, for example, as well. In other news, Durham Police confirming it'll investigate the Labour leader over allegations that he broke lockdown rules. He's previously insisted that no rules were broken. Conservatives have lost overall control of councils such as West Oxfordshire, Southampton and Worcester. They'll take some comfort from the fact that in England outside London, Labour's progress has been more modest. The Greens and the Lib Dems are doing well. Sir Davey was out this morning congratulating his Lib Dem team in southwest London. Party has gained Kingston upon Hull from Labour, is now in control of Somerset Council. Early results from Scotland suggest the SNP will remain by far the largest party, with an interesting battle for second place developing between Labour and the Conservatives. Conservatives did well in Wales at the last local elections. They might be bracing themselves now for a more difficult afternoon, we're being told, from Denbighshire in the north to the Vale of Glamorgan in the south. And Reeta Chakrabati is with us at the touchscreen with each and every result.
And with over 2/3 of the councils declared now in England, you can see Labour has made gains, the Conservatives have made losses, and it's been a healthy performance, a very healthy performance by the Lib Dems and the Greens.
We'll have our Night with the Numbers, Professor John Curtis, to tell us more about the projected national share of the vote for the parties. That's coming up. And our team of correspondents are at all the important counts, and with political reputations at stake, of course, Vicky Young with us to tell us what the results mean for the party leaders. We'll have political reaction here in the studio. Emily Thornberry from Labour has kindly just joined us. We'll have a chat with Emily in a short while. So join us then for the voters' verdict in Election Day on the BBC. Yes, indeed. Welcome back here at the BBC's election studio at New Broadcasting House in London. And we are, of course, keeping a very close look at these counts taking place across England today. They were overnight as well. The ones taking place right now in Scotland and in Wales. And I'm told that we're just getting the first result also in from Northern Ireland. We'll bring that as soon as we can. So plenty to talk about. I'll be properly welcoming Emily Thornberry in a few minutes' time, who's just joined us now from Labour. Thanks for coming in, Emily. And Vicky, of course, is still with me here in the studio as well. So let's take a break, have a quick update with the news. And here's Martine.
Huw, thank you very much. Hello, here's a summary of the BBC News. Police in Durham have opened an investigation into whether the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules on a visit during which he drank beer in an MP's office. The Labour leader earlier hailed local election results, which saw the party seize control of 3 flagship councils in London. Boris Johnson has described the polls as a tough night for the Tories after the Liberal Democrats and Greens also made gains. BBC analysis suggests that had the whole country been voting, Labour would have secured 35% of the national vote, with the Conservatives on 30%. Nick Eardley has a roundup of all the election news.
Election highs for some mean lows for others. Labour picked up councils they've never held before in London. Across England, the Conservatives have lost dozens of seats so far.
What is the name of the Queen?
And some are questioning whether the Prime Minister is part of the problem.
This has been a tough night for Conservatives in some parts of the country, and in other parts of the country we're actually moving forward. And so for midterm, it's quite interesting that it's a mixed set of results. But the lesson is we've got to get on with the stuff that matters to people.
The result isn't as bad as some Tories feared, but the final picture could be worse. More losses are likely in the coming hours. And after he was fined for parties in Downing Street, some are pointing the finger of blame at the Prime Minister.
Those in power in Westminster really do need to take a good, hard look in the mirror, because it's the rank and file grassroots members that they rely on that are actually losing their seats tonight.
Labour are on the up, at least in some places. They've won Westminster Council for the first time ever. Wandsworth, which had been Conservative blue since the 70s, and Barnet, where Keir Starmer visited this morning. But outside London, it's not as rosy, with Labour struggling to make gains. Have you done enough outside London?
This is a massive turning point for the Labour Party. From the depths of 2019, we're back on track now for the general election, showing what the change that we've done, the hard change we've done in the last 2 years, what a difference it has made.
But this afternoon, the police said they were opening an investigation into the Labour leader over an event he attended during COVID restrictions.
Have you heard from Durham Police, Sir Keir? Any comment on their investigation?
No response from him, but Labour said they would answer questions and that no rules were broken. The biggest gains so far have been for the Liberal Democrats. They took Hull Council from Labour and won seats from the Conservatives in their rural heartlands.
What began as a tremor in Cheshire and Amersham, what became an earthquake in North Shropshire, has now turned into a shockwave across our country that can see this Conservative government come tumbling down.
The big picture so far is some bad results for the Conservatives, but not a catastrophic fall in support. And while Boris Johnson is getting some of the blame, there hasn't been a clamour of senior Tories saying that the Prime Minister needs to rethink his position. And although Labour may be delighted with their result in London, in the wider country it's a mixed picture, and some will think the party needs to do a lot better if it's going to win a general election. It's also been a good night for the Greens, who've added to their vote share and number of councillors in places like Amber Valley.
What they've seen is that Greens have been working hard in their communities. There is no such thing as safe seats anymore, only safe voters.
There's a lot more to come, with results pouring in this afternoon. The SNP are continuing to dominate in Scotland, but Labour may stage something of a comeback and take second from the Scottish Tories. In Wales, Labour are eyeing up gains, and there's a test too for Plaid Cymru in their popularity since entering into a cooperation agreement in the Senedd. And many eyes will be on Northern Ireland over the course of the afternoon. Could Sinn Fein beat the DUP into first place for the first time? Nick Early, BBC News.
If you want to find the result in your area, head to the BBC News website or BBC News app. Enter your postcode, you'll find lots of election analysis and the latest reports from our teams around the country. And now it's back to election 2022.
Yes, welcome back. We are, of course, keeping tabs on all the latest results coming in. We'll be talking about the results in Wales with the Conservative leader in Wales, Andrew Davies, shortly. We're having a word with Emily Thornberry in the studio here about Labour's performance just in a few minutes. But before that, I hope Emily doesn't mind. We're going to go straight to Northern Ireland because we're getting a few results in there. And let's join Anita. Reeta, I beg your pardon.
Huw, thank you. We have our first result in. This is from Strangford, which is east of Belfast, around Strangford Lough. Traditionally a very unionist area, but the first seat has gone to the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland, the non-aligned Alliance Party of Northern Ireland. This is how it's been done. Remember, in Northern Ireland, it is a proportional representation system. It's the single transferable vote. So this represents the share change since 2017, which is the last time that these seats were fought over. And you can see what's happened. The unionist vote, the DUP and the UUP have gone down, as has the nationalist SDLP, and the beneficiaries, those who've picked up that support, have been the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland and also the TUV, that's Traditional Unionist Voice. So that is the first seat in the Northern Ireland Assembly. It's gone to the Alliance Party candidate Kelly Armstrong. I want to show you one other screen relating to what's happened there, which feels a little bit counterintuitive, because as you can see, in this first round, the first preference share, the DUP, the Unionists, have got a higher proportion of that first preference than the Alliance Party, and yet the seat went to the Alliance Party. How does that happen? Well, the DUP will have more candidates here in this first round than the Alliance Party, but Kelly Armstrong will have picked up the highest number of first preference votes of any single candidate, which is why she's got the first seat.
Thanks very much, Reeta. Well, apologies for getting Reeta confused with Anita. It's a wonder I haven't done it before this. Let's go straight to Northern Ireland. Michelle O'Neill for Sinn Féin is talking now.
Because people wanted us to talk about how we want to work together in partnership with others. That's the only way we'll achieve much more for people here in terms of the cost of living crisis or trying to fix our health service. That was the message that resonated on the doors, and I am very grateful to every voter that came out and placed their support behind the Sinn Féin candidates. It is going to be a very positive election for the party, but as I say, there's a while to go in terms of the votes being counted.
Are you worried about what happens next week?
Excuse me, folks, thank you. I will turn up on day one, as I said, the whole way through the campaign. I encourage others to join with me, and let's work together for the people who've elected us.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, how is the DP doing?
So a clear message there from Michelle O'Neill, the Sinn Féin leader, and looking ahead to the set of results that's coming in for the Northern Ireland Assembly, being rather cautious there about the potential outcome, as you'd expect, because it's never easy to predict, not least because, of course, it's not sure what the Unionists might do in the event of Sinn Féin coming on top of the poll and then having the right to nominate a First Minister. All of that, of course, at the moment is uncertain because we don't have enough results in. But let's join Anita now to just get the latest there.
Huw, thank you very much. And I do have 4 results to tell you about now from the Belfast Count Centre. The first MLA to be returned just a short while ago was Kelly Armstrong from the Alliance Party, the Cross Community Alliance Party in the Strangford constituency. We mentioned that a little earlier. This centre ground party, Cross Community Party, predicted in the polls to do very well in this election. People perhaps tired a little bit of the usual orange and green politics and wanting to go for something else. And then we've had 3 elections for Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin, of course, is the nationalist party that wants to see a united Ireland. So Danny Baker in West Belfast for Sinn Féin, and then Gerry Kelly and Carol Ní elected in North Belfast, all within the last few minutes. That's 4 results we have. Still a long way to go, of course. 90 seats to be filled in total to the Northern Ireland Assembly, and of course at the end of the day the 2 parties who will get the opportunity to nominate to the First and Deputy First Minister positions. And traditionally, of course, under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, that has always been the largest unionist and the largest nationalist party. But now we have this group of politicians, represented, of course, chiefly, I would say, by the Alliance Party traditionally, who are designated as others within the Assembly. It's a strange term, isn't it? They're basically politicians who do not designate themselves or identify themselves as either unionist or nationalist. Let's talk all about this now with Katy Haward, who is Professor of Political Sociology at Queen's University Belfast. Great to have you with us, Katy. So just on these first few results and this idea of Sinn Féin potentially emerging as the largest party and the Alliance in the centre ground doing very well, as polls have predicted.
It's very interesting to see Alliance getting the first MLA being elected. I mean, symbolically, that's very significant. It marks a shift in the landscape of Northern Ireland politics. Of course, if Sinn Féin, as expected, and it looks like it's going that way, does become the largest party in the Assembly, it's responsible for nominating the First Minister. If you have Alliance Party doing well, it will be also responsible for nominating ministerial positions as well. So we'd expect to have more power coming into this new Assembly on the basis of an executive being formed. And this is where we begin to look to the DUP and think, what will they do in response to Sinn Féin?
Let's look at unionism then, because we've had lots of conversations in this election coverage so far about disunity within unionism. You have the Ulster Unionist Party, who have issues with the protocol but say they would work with those issues within the power sharing assembly. And then you have the DUP and the TUV, traditional unionist voice, who are very anti-protocol. How are the TUV doing?
Yes, well, it's notable in Strangford, so where Kelly Armstrong was topping the poll, that second behind her is the TUV, and their strapline is no sea border. They are strongly anti-protocol, standing on that platform, and very likely, therefore, to take some votes away from the DUP. This adds to pressure on the DUP, and we will look to see how well the TUV does, bearing in mind, of course, that it's coming into this election with only one MLA, Jim Allister.
And what happens once all the counting is done and we have those 90 seats filled? Because the idea, we talk about a power-sharing government, but will that actually happen?
That's the question. So the first thing that would happen is, in theory, Sinn Fein, if it becomes the largest party, nominates the First Minister. The second largest will nominate the Deputy First Minister. We know that the DUP is very unlikely to do that. So then we have these talks about forming the new executive. Alliance will be really important in those talks if it does as well as it looks as though it's going to do. But in the meantime, we have the caretaker executive roll over from the existing assembly or the previous assembly. So in that sense, there's a space possibly up to 6 months, maybe longer even, of talks ongoing for the formation of the new executive. What happens to public opinion here in the middle of a fuel crisis, cost of living crisis, healthcare crisis is really a big question.
Professor Katy Hayward, thank you very much for your thoughts on all of that. And Huw, I have to tell you that on Tuesday, when I talked to a whole range of people from different political traditions, at the top of their agendas, it was the issue of the cost of living crisis, and then, of course, healthcare, education, all the things that you would expect a government to deal with. And they really want, whatever political background they were from, they really want, they told me, a functioning assembly at Stormont. So let's see where this election takes that idea.
Indeed, Anita, many thanks. And we'll be back with Anita there, of course, relatively soon. One of the results which is causing a few eyebrows to rise quite sharply is in Somerset. It's that big new authority that Vicky was telling us about a while ago, where the Lib Dems have had a rather stunning range of successes. And Reeta has more details on that.
Yes, this is very eye-catching, Huw. They are still counting there, but the Lib Dems have gone past the winning post. They needed 56 seats and they've got 60. Still quite a few to be declared yet. Now, what is really interesting about this is that the Conservatives have built up big majorities in Westminster seats that come within this area. Westminster seats that used to be Lib Dem. So there may well be some read across that one can have from this Lib Dem win here. Will they feel that they're coming back against the Conservatives? What is also really interesting to look at, not just the bald figures, but the seats change. Look at that. The Conservatives plummeting, losing 33 seats, and pretty much all that support going to the Lib Dems, also helped by 3 independents who've lost their seats to the Lib Dems too. So a very eye-catching win there for the Liberal Democrats.
Reeta, thanks very much. Well, let's get a flavour of the events on the ground then, shall we? And go to the count, which is in Taunton, and we'll join Amanda Parr.
Yes, interesting times indeed here in Somerset, where the Lib Dems, as you've just heard, have reached their majority. Now, there's been incredible excitement here as the results have been rolling in. We've also seen a fair few tears, in fact. Lib Dem candidates just completely overwhelmed by what's been happening here. The Tories have held the county council here for 13 years, and it's long and traditionally been a Lib Dem Tory battleground. Things have been particularly unpredictable this time around because they're getting rid of county and district councils and bringing in a unitary authority instead. So 110 councillors are being elected, 2 for each of the 55 electoral areas. And, voters have really been showing that they care deeply who get those jobs. The turnout figures have been high. They've been in the high 30%, 38, 39%. But yes, as we know, the Lib Dems now have their majority, 60 seats. The Tories have held in some places. They've also enjoyed some surprise gains. But with just over 30 seats so far, it hasn't been enough. Now, the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, must have been fairly confident about what was going to happen here. He jumped on a train to Taunton a little while back, and I think you'll be speaking to him in a little while, Huw.
Amanda, thanks very much indeed. Amanda Parr there in Taunton, reflecting the fact that the Lib Dems have won a majority on the new unitary council there, and with some heavy losses for the Conservatives. Of course, notional in the sense that it's a new authority, so it's not comparing exact like with like, because obviously the configuration is different, but the notional losses are certainly significant. Let's talk about a different kind of loss, this time for the Labour Party. Hastings. If we look at Hastings, which is, of course, down in the south of England, we have 15 seats to Labour, 12 to the Tories, 5 to the Greens. Labour short by 2. And that means that we can look at the change of seats and see that Labour lost 3 and the Greens have gained 3, so that Labour have lost control of Hastings. We'll get a response from Emily Thornberry in a second, but I also want to remind everyone watching of the projected national share, which we showed you earlier on. This is the projected national share calculated by Sir John Curtis and the team, showing Labour on 35% after this election in 2022, the Conservatives on 30%, the Lib Dems on 19%, and the others on 16%, so showing that Labour have won the election with a 5-point lead over the Conservatives. But John then adding his own comment, which was that the gains made by Labour, in his view, were nothing spectacular. There were some eye-catching ones, of course, including the councils in London, including Westminster especially. But he was really talking about a potential springboard for general election victory. So that's the context for the comments. Emily, thanks for waiting to talk to us. First of all, let's just deal with Hastings. Was that expected?
Well, the Greens were certainly working really hard in Hastings. There is some support for the Greens, particularly along the south coast, in local elections. The point is, it's local elections, and smaller parties do tend to do well in local elections. That doesn't translate into general elections, and we're certainly very hopeful of winning Hastings at the next general.
When we look at the projected national share, clearly it's useful as a yardstick because at least it allows us to compare performances year after year in different elections, so people have something to go on which is more reliable. So it's a 5-point lead, so Labour have clearly won the local elections. That's absolutely right. It's whether it's enough or whether it excites you enough to think that you're on the right course and that you're getting there at a speed which is necessary. Now, John Curtis was suggesting that you probably weren't on the basis of that. What would your response be?
I think what I would say is, I'm sure that John will remember how everybody felt the morning after the election in 2019, and how some people were even saying this was the end of the Labour Party, we weren't going to get anywhere, that was it. And we're turning things around. Yeah, we've had some spectacular results in London, but also in the London suburbs, also, up as far as Carlisle, down as far as Southampton, all sorts of results. And I've been putting together a list of the seats that we lost last time, which on the basis of last night we would win, places like Workington and Rossendale and Great Grimsby, Hartlepool, Lee, Peterborough, Bromley East, Wolverhampton, West and North East and South West. I mean, it's all of these places, which, obviously they're not the London seats. The Tories are trying to push it that, they did well in London, but they're not really doing that well across the rest of the country. We're not saying that we would win the general election tomorrow, but what we're saying is that we're on our way. And we know that we have more work to do, and the work that needs to be done, we will do. But, it gives us great hope. And we're really encouraged. And I'll be honest with you, in the Shadow Cabinet, when we were having presentations about how well we might do and what we could expect, this is most definitely at the top end. Right. Now, Oliver Dowden is not going to get the same response as we will be getting. We will be giving the leader of our election campaign at the Cabinet, because the real story. Step back. The real story is just the decimation of the Tory vote up and down the country.
But John was making the point again. I mean, cautiously that on the basis of this PNS, it wasn't even certain that Labour would be the biggest party in the new Parliament. So it's not just that doubts about whether you'd be on course to win an election, which you've openly conceded there readily. It's even to do with whether you'd be the biggest party. So.
Well, no, because the point is that if you start off with, the baseline is that we lost appallingly in 2019. Yeah. And so we need to go from that, they had an 80-seat majority, and we need to do the most extraordinary thing, which is to go from that low point to winning the next general. And we are, on the right trajectory. Yeah. And we have more work to do. We know that. We're not complacent. And the next election will be the first one for, I don't know how long, where the Tories will just be running a defensive campaign. And they've shown They don't even know how to do a defensive campaign, whereas we know how up and down the country to talk to people, and we talk to them about the issues that matter, which is cost of living, and actually putting forward some suggestions as to what could be done. I mean, what are the Tories doing? They're doing divisive politics, they're doing culture war, they're doing blaming the electorate. I mean, what are they actually offering?
But isn't the truth that actually in large parts of England, it's not you challenging the Conservatives, it's the Liberal Democrats? And if we look to the next general election, OK, it might be 2 years away, but that's a lot of work you've got to do between now and then. Isn't the truth that you need the Lib Dems, actually, if you're going to oust the Conservatives?
No. We're going for this election on the basis...
So what's going to change, given it is the Lib Dems challenging in an awful lot of parts of southern England?
No, we go into this with confidence and knowing that things are so much in flux. That 2019 was really... It was the first kind of single issue election that we'd had for 100 years. And we've had UKIP and we've had the Brexit Party and all, people moving backwards and forwards. It's really, really volatile. But we know that we're going in the right direction, and we know that we're increasing the amount of support we're getting, and we know that we're doing it up and down the country. And that is really important.
Not in Somerset.
Not in Somerset, but throughout. And what about the results that we're hoping that we may get in Scotland? If we're the second party in Scotland, that also makes things very different. If we're doing better, we come from a high point in Wales, but we're looking to what's going to happen in the north of Wales. We hope that we will do well there. And people want to caricature that we have no chance anymore in the Red Wall. We do. We are in play, and people are thinking about us. And at the next general election, what they have to do is think about, we don't want to have this tired, dishonest government anymore. Is there an alternative? Is this one viable? Can we rely on it? Can we believe in it? And that's what our challenge is. And that will be the decision next time.
Overnight, there was lots of talk about to what extent party leaders can impact local campaigns. Can they be a positive influence? Can they be a distraction? We had a big debate about Boris Johnson and the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And then, of course, some people did make comments about Keir Starmer, saying, people aren't quite sure what he's about. People think that he's a little bit bland. Somebody used the word weak. Where are we? Where are you, do you think, in terms of Labour's leadership issue, and whether Keir Starmer has put his stamp on things to the extent that he needs to?
I think that when you're looking for a Prime Minister, I think that it is a good starting point to want someone who is honest and straightforward and who is principled. And that is a stark contrast between Keir Starmer and our current Prime Minister, quite frankly. But you also need to have ideas. You need to be able to show that you can change people's lives and that politics can change people's lives for the better. And that's what the Labour Party is about. Obviously there were some national elements that were involved yesterday, and there were some local elements. It's always a mixture, and it's quite difficult to kind of unpick it. But today, I'm not going to say, what I think. We were saying before the election how much Boris Johnson's behaviour and the behaviour of others within the Conservative Party was impacting on Tory voters. I don't have to say that today. I can just quote all these Tory leaders of local councils and what they're saying today. They're saying that the appalling behaviour of the leadership has certainly impacted locally on local Conservative voters.
Emily, we'll pause there for a second. Thank you. Let's look at quick look at the state of the parties in Wales, if you can, because Emily mentioned there the north of Wales and Labour's prospects. We've got 2 out of 22 councils declared in Wales. Plaid Cymru on 53 councillors at the moment, plus 10. The Independents, traditionally very strong in many parts of Wales, on 46, they're down 8. Labour up 3 and 25. It's very early days, of course, 20 authorities to come. The Tories on 9, down 3. The Lib Dems on 2, that's down 2 at the moment. So we've got 20 councils yet to declare. But let's bring in the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, who is Andrew R.T. Davies, who's waiting to talk to us. Andrew, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Huw.
How does it look for you?
Well, it's been a hard night at the office. The counts obviously are still continuing. There's a lot more counts to continue in the next couple of hours, so the picture will come far clearer. The national message was a difficult one for us to walk through this campaign, but we fielded a record number of candidates, 669 candidates, the only major party to grow our candidate base. But I have to say the national picture was very difficult for us to deal with.
When we look at the overall picture, Andrew, I'm just wondering, because of your detailed knowledge of events on the ground there, where is likely to be the most challenging part for you? Where do you expect to have the most difficult experience in these results during the course of this afternoon and this evening?
Well, as someone who's gone through various local elections here in Wales, this looks very similar to the 2012 election, because in that election we also had some very difficult headlines, which was around pasty tax, caravan tax. This time round, obviously, it's been around other issues. So I think across Wales we're getting reports in of challenges faced at various counts. But what is important to remember here, and certainly I've picked up this when I've been going around Wales, is that the Welsh Conservative brand is very strong, and the welcome that Welsh Conservative candidates has received has been very warm, but it's that national picture that people have been saying that they've been wanting to send a message about, and so that warmth to the Welsh Conservative brand is something we've got to embrace and take forward, whilst understanding the national message that people have wanted to say via the ballot box at these local elections.
Is the message you want to send to Westminster that Boris Johnson has not been helpful to you?
Well, I wouldn't say that. The Prime Minister obviously won the general election with a record number of Conservative MPs being returned in 2019. All governments have difficult mid-term elections, but that's not dismissing the message that's coming out from these elections. What I want to do now is obviously go forward, building on the success we had in 2021 at the Senedd elections and the general election of 2019, recognising the voice of the people via the ballot box at these local elections, and we build a strong Welsh Conservative brand so that we can take that into the general election whenever that's called in 18 months, 2 years' time.
But is that strong Welsh Conservative brand you're talking about, has it been strong enough this time to withstand all the talk of a cost of living crisis and Partygate and all the rest of it? You seem to be suggesting it's been rather strained.
It hasn't been strong enough, quite simply. The two main issues in this campaign have been obviously around the cost of living, and because of the issues at number 10, every time a Conservative spokesperson's gone on the stump, they've been talking about issues that obviously are important to the electorate, but not obviously talking about the policy positions that we have taken to help with the cost of living. And that's proved challenging for candidates on the doorsteps. But we've listened, we'll learn from these elections, and ultimately we'll go forward as a stronger party, hopefully building on success of 2019 and 2021, learning from 2022 and building momentum into the general election.
Andrew, we'll keep an eye on the results clearly, very closely as they come in, but thanks very much for joining us now.
Thank you.
Andrew Davies there, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives and Conservatives in the Welsh Senedd. Our thanks to him. Now, I want to remind you about the story that was breaking as we came on air, the statement from Durham Constabulary, following the receipt of significant new information in recent days, said the police in Durham. The Constabulary has reviewed the position, that's to say, in relation to allegations of breaking the rules in terms of Sir Keir Starmer and some party workers. And following the conclusion of the pre-election period, we can confirm that an investigation into potential breaches of COVID-19 regulations relating to this gathering, which was the one in, I think we said April 2021, wasn't it, Vicky? That was it? Is now being conducted. Now, we discussed this earlier. This has happened today. It was a statement that was put out at lunchtime. And clearly, it's been at the heart of a debate over the last few weeks following the fact that the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, had been fined for breaking the rules in terms of gatherings. And of course, the Metropolitan Police investigations are still ongoing. They're still not at an end. But now Durham Police, who at one point looked at this meeting and said that they found no problem with it, have now gone back to it saying that they've got significant new information over recent days. Now, given that Emily's with us here and is a senior member of the party, were you surprised by this?
No, there's been a campaign from Conservative MPs in the run-up to this election and supported by a lot of Conservative supporting newspapers to get this investigation reopened, and it's been reopened.
Are you annoyed by it?
No, listen, we will answer any questions that the police have got for us, and we're completely confident that no rules have been broken, so it's fine.
When it says receipt of significant new information over recent days, do you find that intriguing? Do you find that puzzling?
I don't know what that is. So, but you know, we'll be there to answer any questions that they've got.
So you've no idea what that new information could be?
I don't know.
and your view of the original meeting or gathering or whatever you want to call it hasn't changed, has it? Which is that no rules were broken.
Absolutely not. We're absolutely confident that there's nothing to answer here. The police investigated, there was nothing there, and there is nothing there.
When Rishi Sunak was fined, or investigated, in fact, first of all, and the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer said that just because they were being investigated, they should resign. Do you think he should?
No, because the context is completely different, if you think about it. What was happening in Number 10 was that there were a series of these things being organised, and that's the point, organised in advance. We knew that, for example, the birthday cake one, which is supposed to be one of the lesser offences, there were invitations sent out on the basis of it being a celebration. We understand the emails, we understand there are photographs which also support this. And it is just like the woman who arrived at a friend's house with a birthday card, just going to hand in a birthday card, and there was a birthday party going on. She joined in and she got fined. It's not fair for her to be fined and for Rishi Sunak not to be fined.
Even though he was there for a meeting,
but once he realised that there was a party, you know, he was involved in the party. He didn't go, and it wasn't just people, work colleagues. It was the decorator and the wife and the dog and everything else. It was completely different and certainly not a work meeting. So it's on the face of it totally different, and it was pre-organised, and it was organised as a celebration.
And do you think that there is another parallel, which is a very similar thing happened? I mean, the Met Police didn't originally investigate what was happening in Number 10, and then after pressure from different newspapers, they did then start asking questions. I mean, do you think it would have been better for Sir Keir Starmer to answer some of the facts about how many people were there, the fact that Angela Rayner was there, what they were doing there? Should he have done that earlier rather than let it get to this point where it's dragged on for quite a long time, and now it looks a bit like the answers of having to be forced out of him?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you say. I mean, I think that there was a mistake made at the beginning when I think that a press officer was asked by some journalists about whether Angie was there, and they said no without checking. But you know, it was all on the internet. I mean, you know, it was an open meeting. It was done on the web, so it was quite clear that Angie had been there. And then when we were asked 3 months later, her office said, yeah, she was there. There really isn't a cover up here, you know. And I mean, what can I tell you? You know, that's the situation.
We'll see what happens then, Emily. But many thanks for responding to it
Not at all.
like that. It was lots of viewers will be interested in your thoughts on it, given that it's happened in the last few hours. We're going to be talking to Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, in a short while. He, of course, put in a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister and then withdrew it. So we'll be talking about the Conservative performance in Scotland. Before then, I think we can have the state of the parties in Scotland, and we can join Reeta.
Yes, Huw. So we've got over half of the councils declared now. Proportional representation used in Scotland, of course. This is how the parties are looking at the moment. The SNP has gained 21 councillors. Labour has gained 14. Conservatives have lost 49. And you can see the Lib Dems and the Greens have picked up councillors as well. I want to show you the councils that have changed hands. Never very much movement in Scotland, again because of PR, but the SNP has gained one and Labour has also gained one. And interesting too, in terms of the state of the parties, is the change in the share of the vote from last time round, from 2017. You can see the SNP up by 2, Labour up by 1, but the Conservatives down by 6. Now, in the last election, the Conservatives came second to the SNP. Does this mean that Labour will now overtake them and take that second place? I've also got some individual results to bring you. So Dundee, we've reported already, is an SNP gain from no overall control. West Dunbartonshire, a Labour gain from no overall control. And South Ayrshire, Clackmannanshire, East Ayrshire, they remain hung, and they're still counting in Glasgow. And Glasgow also no overall control in the previous election. Let's just take a look behind the results, though, and see what's happened to the vote. So here the Conservatives are the biggest party, but short by 5 seats. What's happened to the Tory vote here, though? They've lost 2 seats since last time. The SNP actually a smidgen ahead in terms of first preference votes, but look at that, an 11 percentage point fall in the Conservative first preference share since 2017. So that's pretty grim reading for the Conservatives. Let's take a look at another one. Let's see what's going on in Glasgow. So this is, let's try that again. This is grey because they are still counting. The winning post is 43 seats and they're not quite halfway through yet. But we can still see what's happening, I think, to the share of the vote. Let me take you through this. So the Conservatives have lost 3 seats so far. Labour gained 2, the Greens have gained 2. That is the way in which the first preferences have divided up. But this last one shows you the change in the share, and the Greens, a great beneficiary this time round, up 6 percentage points. But the SNP and the Conservatives both down by 5 points.
Reeta, many thanks, because there are quite a few elements of the Scottish results which are interesting, and indeed we're now getting a few results in as well from Northern Ireland, which both of which I want to talk to John Curtis about. John, thanks for joining us again. On Scotland, how do you read the picture there now?
Well, we're looking at a modest increase in SNP support, which will be enough for the party to get a record share of the vote in local government elections in Scotland. But as we've seen, particularly in Glasgow, their coalition partners, the Greens, are also advancing by at least as much as the SNP so far. And on occasion, it seems pretty clear, and particularly in Glasgow, that the Green advance has come at the expense of the SNP. This should not surprise us, because those who vote Green, they might be concerned about the environment, but they also tend very much to be those on the yes side of the argument, given the polarisation of Scottish politics. The big losers are the Conservatives, and it looks as though still looks as though the Conservatives will come third, perhaps by no more than a couple of points or so. But one of the things that's particularly making life difficult for them is illustrated by that South Ayrshire result that Rita's just shown us. The party's support is particularly falling back in the areas where it scored particularly well 5 years ago. South Ayrshire is one of those parts of Scotland that could still provide quite a lot of Conservative votes, even in the dark days of the 1997 general election. But you can see how strongly it has fallen back. So the interesting thing, therefore, is that on the unionist side, the fragmentation, the political fragmentation of that side of the Scottish constitutional argument, I think it's been exacerbated. The Labour Party does come second. Then, frankly, it'll be a struggle to get the two unionist parties to agree which is the ones who should be taking the lead in the campaign in defence of the union, let alone any of them actually being able to come to an agreement about any kind of joint campaign if there were to be a referendum. But the interesting thing, perhaps, on the national side, on the one hand, these results do, I think, confirm that Alex Salmond's attempt to fragment the nationalist vote is going nowhere. His party's got very low shares of the vote. But that the Greens, in contrast, are now providing some competition to the SNP. And to that extent, at least, these elections will indicate that the SNP are not quite so dominant on the yes side of the argument. I would suspect some people inside the SNP will be asking themselves whether or not, in allowing the Greens to enter the government at Holyrood, they've given the Greens a little bit of a leg up, perhaps at the SNP's own expense.
John, for now, many thanks. We'll talk a bit later on about Northern Ireland. Let's stay with Scotland for the moment. We're joined from Glasgow by the Labour leader there, Anna Sarwar. Mr Sarwar, thanks very much for joining us. Let's have your readout on Labour's performance so far.
Well, this is, for almost a decade, the first positive and cheerful day, I think, for the Scottish Labour Party. And I'm very confident that by the end of today we'll be in a comfortable second place, both in terms of vote share and in terms of seats. But to be really clear, I don't aspire for Labour to be in second place. I aspire for Labour to be in first place. We had a mammoth task when I took over just over a year ago, when we were at around 14% in the opinion polls. We managed to stop Armageddon last year. We've demonstrated progress this year, making gains both off the SNP and off the Tories, winning in parts of Scotland that we haven't won in a very, very long time. But now we want us to move forward to think about the next general election, think about the next Scottish Parliament election, and how we continue to build support here in Scotland. So one, we can boot Boris out of Downing Street and elect a UK-wide Labour government, but also be in a position here to say to people across Scotland, we don't have to carry on with the same division that we've had from the SNP and the Tories. We have a different chance of change, and that can come through the Scottish Labour Party.
Just bear with us, Anas, because I'm just going to put up some of the latest figures here from Scotland so viewers can see these clearly. We have 18 out of 32 local authorities declared. And in terms of councillors, 362 to the SNP, that's up 21. Labour up 15 on 217. The Tories down 50, that's 50 on 168. The Independents down 13. The Lib Dems are up 17. The Greens are up 10. So if we look at that, on plus 15 for Labour at the moment in terms of numbers of councillors, and you're very confident, you say, that you'll end up at the end of the 32 declarations in a clear second place. Is that right?
Yes, so I think we've still got a number of declarations to come. We know from mood music at different counts across the country that we'll still see more gains across the country. So I'm really confident by the end of the day it will be clear in terms of second in terms of vote share, but also in terms of seats. But I repeat again, that's not my ambition. Of course, I'm pleased by that. Of course, I'm pleased that we have a cheerful day for the Scottish Labour Party after, for almost a decade, people writing us off as if we're no longer on the pitch, no longer relevant to Scotland. But I want us to build on this now and actually demonstrate we can make a real difference in people's lives. We're on people's sides and we aspire to win across the country.
It's an interesting question about the nature of your campaign there, given that, of course, there's been a kind of a series of very big headlines from Westminster to do with Partygate, the cost of living especially, which of course is affecting people right across the UK. And then, of course, in Scotland, you are also dealing with a matrix of elections there with the Scottish Government and the SNP in power there. So how did the dynamics of the campaign work in terms of Labour in Scotland? What was your main focus?
Look, I think the single biggest issue for people across the country is not the usual political machinations, but clearly was the cost of living crisis. And people in Scotland, by a clear majority, felt that the UK government was not doing enough to support, but also didn't feel that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP were doing enough to support in the cost of living crisis. And I'm hoping that this election campaign, we have delivered a message to Rishi Sunak and to Boris Johnson that they've got to do more to address people's cost of living crisis. But also here in Scotland, the SNP needs to actually use its powers rather than replicating the Rishi Sunak model to provide more support and help to people right here in Scotland. So the cost of living was the single biggest issue. There's another couple of things to mention though. One is, it's clear now that the nasty party is back in terms of the Conservatives. It's clear that the Ruth Davidson project is dead and there is now a more progressive, future-looking, forward-looking alternative here in Scotland, and that's the Scottish Labour Party. And now our eyes are firmly set on the SNP so we can change the way we do our politics, but more importantly change the country so we actually get the issues that matter to people back as a focus, not this constitutional obsession and this game that the SNP and the Tories have had our country play for almost a decade here in Scotland.
Well, we hope to be talking to the SNP in a short while, but Anna Sarwar, thank you very much for joining us for now.
Thank you much.
Labour leader in Scotland, Anna Sarwar, thanks to him. We were discussing earlier the strong Lib Dem performance in parts of England, certainly, where we were looking at the new authority in Somerset. We were having a look there at the count in Taunton. Quick reminder before I talk to the party leader, Sir Ed Davey, that the Somerset result looked like this, and there are 8 seats yet to declare, 60 to the Lib Dems, 33 to the Tories, 56 needed for a majority, so clearly it's a Lib Dem controlled new authority there. And if we look at the change, well, this is notional because, of course, it's a new authority. It's not based on actual comparisons with directly comparable previous wards. 36 up for the Lib Dems and 33 down for the Conservatives. So let's go to Taunton, and Sir Ed Davey is there for us. Ed, good afternoon. Congratulations on the results where you've done very well. What led to it?
Well, thank you very much, Huw. We have done really well across the country. I'm here in Somerset, where we've taken control of the council. And when I I canvassed across the country, met lots of people, and the biggest issue across the country was the cost of living emergency. Millions of families and pensioners are really struggling, and the Conservative government was not doing anything near enough to help those people. And Liberal Democrats were saying, look, you've got to give them a tax cut, a cut in VAT worth £600 to the average family. That's the sort of positive measure that the Liberal Democrats were arguing for. And I'm afraid the Conservatives were just taking people for granted. That's what we heard.
When you look at the kind of campaign that you've been fighting there, and indeed in other parts of the south of England, how does it work in terms of your own issues and then personality? How much did you focus, for example, on Boris Johnson as a leader and his values as Prime Minister, or indeed on your own policies to do with local areas such as Somerset and the issues that are relevant to people there? They'll include the cost of living, but other things as well. How did that campaign divide?
Well, if you look at the leaflets that Liberal Democrats were putting out across the country, they normally focus on local issues. We're community politicians. If you elect a Liberal Democrat councillor, you elect a strong local champion who fight for you, your family and your community. That's exactly what people get when they vote Liberal Democrats. So we were focusing on many local issues. Yes, the cost of living has got a national element, of course, to it. The environment's always big for the Liberal Democrats, and we've been pointing out in Parliament and on our leaflets the fact that the Conservatives were letting the water utilities get away with pumping filthy raw sewage into our rivers and lakes, and that's just not acceptable. So we've been standing up for people, for their communities, offering them a fair deal, and that's what we've been talking about. Of course, back in the Westminster bubble, there's been the story of Partygate and the appalling behaviour of the Prime Minister, law breaking and the lies and the sleaze and scandal of the Conservative MPs. That obviously was on some people's minds, but we weren't campaigning on that. We were campaigning on the issues that mattered to people: the cost of living, the NHS, the environment.
Ed, it's Vicky Young here in the studio, and you've obviously had some real big successes, particularly in some of those areas like Somerset, which of course were strongholds for the Liberal Democrats for many years. And you will be looking to the next general election. You know, we know that there's a by-election coming up in Devon near where you are. You've been in Wimbledon today. You're looking at parliamentary seats, of course. But ultimately, even if you do well next time round, you know you can't do enough to form the next government. It looks on these projections that Labour can't do it on their own either. And of course, the inevitable question, is there some kind of agreement between the two of you about what you would do, given you both want to oust the Conservatives?
No, there isn't. I, as Liberal Democrat leader, am focusing on winning more Liberal Democrat council seats and more members of Parliament. What was really interesting, the results for the Liberal Democrats last night, was in seats that we need to take from the Conservatives. Here in Taunton, for example, but in places like Wimbledon, where I was earlier, these are key seats for the Liberal Democrats next election, which I believe we can win. And Boris Johnson out of Downing Street, to get the Conservatives out of power, all the arithmetic shows we need a strong Liberal Democrat performance, and there are seats across the country, up in the north like Cheadle and Hazel Grove, Harrogate, lots of places where Liberal Democrats are the only people who can beat the sitting Conservative MP, and if we do, we can oust the Conservatives from government. That's my focus.
Yeah, you oust him from government, that's what you want to achieve, but then what? That's what voters will want to know, of course.
Well, if you vote for Liberal Democrats, you get Liberal Democrat people arguing for Liberal Democrat policies, our priorities, whether they're trying to help people on the cost of living, our proposal for a tax cut, for example, our proposals to help more vulnerable families and pensioners by taking money directly off their energy bills, our proposals to clean up our environment, our proposal for the NHS and care. These are the issues that really matter to people, Vicky. There will be what we'll focus on before the election and after the election.
Ed, thank you very much for joining us. The clock's slightly against us, but once again, congratulations to you and the team on where you've done well, and good of you to bring along a band of supporters as well to support you in the interview, which is stage management of an exceptional kind.
They're a great. Huw, they're a great band here in Somerset, but in Woking, I can tell you we have taken control of Woking. So it looks like. It looks like we might have won 4 councils. Hull off Labour in the north, Westmoreland and Furness in the north, Woking in Surrey, and of course, Somerset.
Before you get overexcited, Ed, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Sir Ed Davey there with his team in Taunton, having notched up that victory there in the new authority in Somerset. Earlier on, we were talking to the Labour leader in Scotland, Anna Sarwar. We're now able to talk to, I'm pleased to say, Douglas Ross, who's the Conservative leader, who joins us now from Elgin. Douglas, thanks very much for joining us. I'm just wondering, what's your readout of how your party has done in Scotland overnight?
Well, it's been a difficult night, and the results coming in today are very disappointing. We've got some areas where it's been very good. Here in Moray, we recorded our best ever result, more councillors than ever before. Every one of our candidates elected, and the SNP went backwards. In neighbouring Aberdeenshire, we're making gains, but in too many parts of Scotland, we have lost excellent candidates, and councillors haven't been re-elected because it seems many of our supporters decided to sit this one out, to protest and not cast their vote, and we've lost out as a result of that.
So that's one factor that you've outlined for us. Were there other factors that are outside your control? For example, lots of your party colleagues in England were telling us overnight that they'd had trouble distancing themselves from some of the events at Westminster to do with Partygate. Others telling us that the government hadn't done enough in terms of the cost of living crisis. Were those factors that troubled you as well?
Well, it was certainly the Partygate issue that dominated the discussions I had with voters who were reluctant to come out and support us as they have in the past. In 2015 we had a record result here in Scotland, so we're coming into these elections on the back of a very strong set of results 5 years ago, but there's absolutely no doubt that people have sent a message to the Prime Minister and the government, particularly around Partygate. That's what came out loud and clear.
And on the cost of living crisis, where, again, some of your colleagues were telling us that in their view, despite what the Chancellor's put in place, voters were saying that there simply wasn't enough help available, certainly in terms of helping with sharply rising fuel bills, etc. Again, is that something that voters were saying to you was a reason not to vote Conservative?
Yes, again, this is a thing people are experiencing, be it in their domestic heating bills or when they go to fill their car. I represent a very rural area here in Moray and across the Highlands and Islands. People rely on their cars. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity, and they are seeing a real increase in cost of living and the cost of energy. And I believe the Chancellor and the government have made some attempts to deal with that, but clearly more must be done. And I think the government accept that as well.
Douglas, it's Vicky Young here in the studio. You've talked before about, of course, calling for Boris Johnson to resign as leader. You withdrew that because of what's going on in Ukraine. But, of course, there are lots of people who sadly feel that that situation will go on for months, if not years. Are you now saying that Boris Johnson should lead your party into the next general election?
Well, I hope that conflict doesn't go on for months and years, but we've got to be realistic. However, we are at a crucial stage. We know in the next few days the Russians want to claim victory in their annual Victory Day, and we've got to do everything possible to support President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine, who have been able to defend their country for far longer than many of us expected. However, the Prime Minister simply can't ignore the message that has been sent from voters, not just here in Scotland, but across the UK. Obviously, you know, the Conservatives lost Westminster Council last night. That's a council that even in the peak Labour years under Tony Blair, the party held on to. So there's been a very strong message from the public to the Prime Minister and to the party.
Interesting to talk to you, Douglas Ross. Thank you very much for joining us today in Elgin. Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives there. Earlier on, we were discussing prospects in Northern Ireland, which are notoriously difficult to predict, of course, because of the complexity of the political setup there, not least with the assembly elections, of course, affecting the way that the protocol after Brexit has been disputed, and people there questioning whether the government's shown goodwill towards that protocol in the way that they've dealt with it. A rather multi-layered campaign. And of course, still the prospect, an historic prospect, that Sinn Féin could come at the top of the poll for the first time, pushing the Unionists into second place. We don't know yet. But John Curtis is joining us once again. John, are you in a position to shed any light on what's likely to happen in Northern Ireland?
Yes, I think we can, Huw. We have been looking at a series of results. We've now got at least half of the 18 constituencies in Northern Ireland with what we call the first preference vote. And anywhere where there was anything very much in the way of a DUP vote, i.e. pretty much anywhere apart from West Belfast, has witnessed a marked decline in the vote support for that party, including in Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's own constituency, while in particular the traditional Unionist voice, which is the party that is even more adamantly opposed to the Northern Ireland Protocol and what they call the border across the Irish Sea that creates. They oppose it even more so than the DUP, are also often picking up significant shares of the vote. Meanwhile, Sinn Féin appear to be at least, and indeed in some instances, even managing to increase their share of the vote, including in very nationalist places like Belfast West. So putting all those things together, we are now convinced, as indeed our colleagues who are assisting BBC Northern Ireland in Belfast and doing the coverage there, that Sinn Féin will emerge at the top of the poll so far as votes are concerned. And this, of course, would be the first time that this has happened since the partition of Ireland and the creation of Northern Ireland in 1922. We suspect, but we cannot be as adamant about the fact that we anticipate that Sinn Féin will also be the largest party in the Assembly. But we can't be quite so sure of that because, for example, the traditional Unionist voice is running at around 7-8% of the vote. That's probably not going to be enough for it to pick up a seat in many places. So the question then arises, where will that vote go during the transfer process? And the answer we know, at least according to the opinion polls, is a lot of it will go back to the DUP. The gap between Sinn Féin and the DUP is probably going to be too close for such transfers to close the gap between Sinn Féin and DUP entirely, but we can't be entirely sure. So we're not saying definitely that Sinn Féin will have the most seats, and that's what matters in terms of who has the right to the First Minister position. But that certainly is the direction in which the wind seems to blow. The Alliance Party, by the way, they're in a tough battle with the Ulster Unionists, who are the kind of most moderate of the Unionist parties. The Alliance Party is tending to do relatively well in more middle class, but also more Unionist constituencies, and seems to be eating into the Ulster Unionist vote in such seats. But it's too close to say whether or not the Alliance will actually make it into third place, which, if they were, would also be something of a historical first as well.
Indeed, John, thank you. I'm going to stop you there, if you don't mind, to get some reaction. Let's go straight to Anita, who's in Belfast.
Huw, thank you very much, and let's address that issue of where the Alliance Party will be, the cross-community party will be at the end of the count that's going on at 3 centres around Northern Ireland, including here in Belfast, because with me I have the leader of the Alliance Party, Naomi Long, who has been returned with a comfortable number in her East Belfast constituency. Congratulations on that, Naomi Long. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. And at this stage, polls have certainly predicted that you're going to do very well. Are you going to put a number of seats on it at this stage?
I think it would be unwise. With an STV election, so much will rely on the transfers further down the line that it would be foolish now to try to predict exact numbers. But it's certainly been a very strong poll for Alliance in terms of first preferences, and we've already seen a number of our candidates top the poll, myself and Kelly Armstrong, and we're now the largest party in my own constituency in East Belfast, and I think we will see over the day that we are hopeful of returning 2 candidates in a number of seats that we targeted, and new candidates in a number of other seats. So I think it will be a good day for Alliance, but how good we really remains to be seen.
And why is that? What is driving voters towards you?
Well, I think voters are concerned about issues like the cost of living crisis. They're concerned about the state of the Northern Ireland Health Service, and what they have seen from Alliance over the last 2 years in government is delivery on the issues that matter to people. So as Justice Minister, I was able to show what we can do when we're in government, and I think people responded to what was a very positive message from us, a constructive message, one that is about getting government up and running in Northern Ireland, which is not a given, and making sure that we can actually start to deliver on the priorities that people have. I think people have had enough of the orange and green politics. They are tired of this constant binary division in our society. What they want to see is us healing those divisions, working together in everyone's best interests, and they know that Alliance is the strongest way to voice that particular view.
But how are you going to deliver if the Stormont executive after this election does not return in a functioning and functional way?
Well, I have been very clear with both the Irish and British governments about what needs to happen after this election. We need structures that are fit for purpose in 2020. What went before in 1998 provided a mechanism by which we could manage division in our society, but that is not the ceiling of our ambition for Northern Ireland and never has been. We want to move beyond division to actually work together on delivery for the people here, and so we need structures that encourage that cooperation. There are those who have said they will not go back into government because they either don't like who they'll have to work with, or they're concerned about the protocol, which clearly isn't a big concern with the public. So if they don't want to do government, fine. Let them sit it out, and let those who are willing step up and take that and shoulder the burden of government, because we need government in Northern Ireland, irrespective of whatever challenges we face.
What has the Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, said on that issue? So we're talking about a reformulation, if you like, of the way the Assembly runs. Up until now, it's been a Unionist First Minister, a Nationalist Deputy First Minister sharing power. The Alliance Party and others who don't designate themselves as Unionist or Nationalist have been described as exactly that, others. So how do you reformulate how the Assembly works?
Well, we think it's very simple. What we need is to offer people their place in government. If they reject it, then you move on to the next largest party and you offer them that place. You don't stop because one party wants to walk away. We shouldn't have a system of government here where a single party can hold government to ransom. It makes no sense. We also need to do away with the designation system. We split people into camps at the beginning of the Assembly term, and we set it up for failure and division. What we need to do is have weighted majority voting in the Assembly on key issues that do affect particular Northern Ireland-based issues, and that would allow us to incentivise cooperation rather than actually entrench division. That's what our ambition is. That's what we've said to the Secretary of State and Secretaries of State before him, and that is the message I will be taking to him when I meet him on Monday afternoon.
Naomi Long, thank you very much. Naomi Long, they're the leader of the Alliance Party, the Cross-Community Alliance Party, and you heard her say there that the structures in Northern Ireland, the power-sharing assembly, encourages division. She says there needs to be something in the process, the structure of power-sharing here that incentivises cooperation, because at the moment the DUP, which in the last Assembly elections emerged as the biggest party, they're saying they will not go back into power sharing unless their concerns about the Northern Ireland Protocol are addressed. Those are the set of rules that deal with post-Brexit trading arrangements. But when I talked to people earlier this week from all sorts of political backgrounds, they told me that the protocol was not front and centre of their thinking. They want politicians, they said, back at the Assembly making decisions on things like the cost of living crisis, healthcare, education and so on. So let's see how the numbers shake down today and where that leaves the respective parties. What will that lead to? A return to Stormont or another Stormont stalemate? We'll see. Huw, back to you.
Anita, many thanks again. Very interesting to hear the interview there and the response. Anita McVeigh will be back with Anita in a short while. Let's refocus then, having looked at Scotland and then Northern Ireland, of course. Let's refocus on England. The state of the parties right now in England at this stage, 122 of 146 councils declared. So we are almost there in terms of the journey to completing the councils in England. In terms of councillors, Labour have put on 57. They're on 1,595. The Tories on 845. They're down 277 at the moment. The Lib Dems have gained 155. We heard from Ed Davey earlier. The Independents up 7. The Greens are up 49. We hope to be talking to them soon. And the Residents' Associations up 10. Very quickly look at the councils themselves. Labour on 52 councils held. That's adding 6 to their tally of councils controlled. The Conservatives on 30, they've lost control of 10. The Lib Dems have added 2. And then 2 more hung councils. And if we look at some of the Labour gains, just to give you one sense of where Labour has been doing well across the UK, well, Southampton we talked about because they took that from the Conservatives. Wandsworth overnight made headlines because Wandsworth had been in Conservative hands since 1978. Westminster, even more of a surprise really, because that had been in Conservative hands since 1964. Barnet in North London as well. And then Rossendale, Crawley, Worthing, Kirklees, where they've gained control from no overall control. So just a sense there of where we are on England. And let's talk about maybe the performance of the Conservative Party. And we're going to join the former Conservative leader, Iain Duncan Smith, who's kindly agreed to join us. Iain, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Afternoon, Huw. I'm happy.
It's good to have you with us. Can I ask, first of all, having gone through the night and having seen what happened in some of those big London councils and then having a look at the rest of England as it's gone forward, what is your take on where the Conservatives are right now?
Well, I think it's a story really of 2 separate areas. One is London. London has, and all the opinion polls show it at the moment, it strongly favours Labour. And the results, I think, last night showed that in the council elections. And elsewhere in the Midlands and in the North particularly, Labour didn't make very big breakthroughs at all. And in fact, I think you had John Curtis on earlier, but John Curtis had said that in a previous interview I saw that he didn't think that Labour overall, therefore, had shown enough to be able to say that they would, if things stayed like this, or even got better for them, be en route to a form of government. So midterm, always difficult. Midterm after a terrible COVID clampdown for 2 years, followed now remorselessly by this massive spike in the cost of living, causing huge problems to people, plus all the issues that were going on previously in and around Westminster. It's not a great time to have elections for the Conservative Party, but overall, I think the Conservative Party probably say they've done better than they might have feared. And Labour's done probably not as well as they had hoped.
When we were talking to some of your party colleagues overnight, especially those who, did feel rather sore because they'd either lost control of a council or they'd lost colleagues or they'd lost their own seats, they did say pretty consistently, actually, and that it was not to do with local issues. It was to do with the cost of living crisis and a feeling that the government, despite what it has already put in place, hadn't done enough and that people wanted more help. In fact, they expected more help. And then the second element was that they felt that the Prime Minister, for various reasons, including the allegations around and the whole Partygate thing, that he'd been an unhelpful presence in the campaign. So can I ask you to deal with those 2 things? Maybe start with the cost of living and the government's response and whether you think it's been adequate.
Well, first of all, yes, you're right in this respect. And if they were saying it, they're right, that the cost of living was probably the biggest single issue that played out on the doorsteps in pretty much every constituency. It's not to say, though, there weren't localized issues, where there was, for example, over much house building in certain areas, and some of the councils got punished for that. Tower blocks across London are a big issue. And so councils that were pushing that, Labour or Conservative, tended to feel a little bit of a backlash from constituents. But there's no question that the cost of living was the major issue because it's growing in people's minds as their bills are going up. Of course, people were still coming out of the annoyance and fury of the problems that existed at the time in Downing Street over the get-togethers that took place. All of that was featuring, but I think the biggest one is cost of living. And the government, somebody said, saw an interview earlier on, well, what do you take from this? And I think this is the big challenge for all governments if they wish to be re-elected after a midterm problem. And the answer is, what do you take? Well, the government's got to take this, which is the public still does not believe that we have resolved enough for them over the cost of living crisis. And I'm one of those that believes the single biggest thing we now need to revisit is the issue around taxation. And we need to cut the taxation burden that is existing now on the public so that we can help them through the COVID outbreak by a very direct and simple measure, and at the same time do some support for those who are in the lower income brackets for whom tax cutting doesn't affect them, but the UC levels could do. So these are two big things that I would say as takeaways. We now need to be bold and we need to act on that and reduce the tax burden on those that are going to face bigger bills, bigger costs over the next year and a half.
I'm bound to say, and we were talking about this earlier to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, you may or may not have seen it. He was basically saying, look, yes, of course we understand people are under pressure, but we're also mindful of the state of public finances, which are not in a good way after the last couple of years and all the extra spending that's been put in place. And for that reason, a very strong hint from him that it would be budget time in the autumn before any other measures might be considered. Now, would that timescale for you be acceptable or not?
Well, it's not whether it's acceptable to me, it's whether I think events are going to allow that timescale. And I'm afraid I don't think they will. The one thing I've known over the time I've been in government is the number of times governments set out their timescales only to find, as Macmillan said, events, dear boy, events, push them in the other direction. And it's always good. So it's always good for governments to act in advance of that issue. As they say, the known knowns and the known unknowns. The known that we know is that this spike in inflation and cost of living is going to relentlessly go on. So I don't see why we need to wait some months down the road to see just how bad that is. We know it will be bad. We need to act early. We need to act in a conservative way, which I believe is to reduce the burden on the public, on individuals through taxation. So I don't fully agree that we've got the time to sit and consider our navels for the next 4 or 5 months whilst we figure out whether or not people are worse off. They will be worse off. We know that. And here is the other problem that exists, Huw. We face a serious problem in the whole of the West. This is not just the UK having a cost of living crisis. We know that. It's every country. But the real issue here is most countries will probably face some monetary tightening. We've seen the Bank of England doing a bit of that now, may do more. This puts pressure already on. What we don't need is what I would call the double whammy of monetary tightening and fiscal tightening, i.e. tax increases. So what we need to do is move on the bit that we really can move. Otherwise, we'll end up in stagflation. And that happens to be the fiscal area, which the government controls. So my personal view, the government may not listen to me at all. I'm sure they won't. But the reality is, I would say we have the headroom to cut those taxes because of our receipts were much greater previously. Yes, we would love to resolve overnight all the problems that existed as a result of COVID, but the fact is we won't be able to. So we have to take a view that the most urgent issue we have to resolve is people's well-being over the next couple of years, and that requires us to move. I'm sorry if it sounded a bit like a lecture, but that's my personal view.
Iain, it's Vicky Young here in the studio. Just to move on to a completely different issue and what's going on in Northern Ireland. And I wonder what you think the government in Westminster should do about the Northern Ireland Protocol, because it's clearly causing ructions within the unionist community. Jeffrey Donaldson talking about it needs to be ditched effectively. There was talk of, in the Queen's speech next week, the government bringing in a bill to actually say that ministers could override the measures in the Northern Ireland Protocol. That now seems to not be happening. What do you think that the Prime Minister should do about this?
Well, Vicky, it's interesting that the number one reason why the European Union insisted on this really poorly thought through process and why it was agreed was because that was the claim that it would protect the Good Friday Agreement. So if we just ask what is it there to do, it's there to protect the Good Friday Agreement. The problem is it's not doing that. It's doing exactly the opposite, as you just explained. The unionist side in Northern Ireland are now beginning to get very anxious and concerned and believe that it's damaging their right as members of the United Kingdom and wishing to have that open free trade with the UK without checks. There is a solution to this. I and others have proposed it, which is called mutual enforcement, where you don't need to have these checks at the border. each side agrees that they will enforce the rules of the other, such that anybody who then breaches those rules by shipping goods one way or the other will be prosecuted in the UK in the case of the European breach, and in Europe in the case of a UK breach. And this would allow us to do this so that we don't have checks on the border. Now, this should be proposed to the European Union. The European Union should be reasonable about it.
That's the problem that the British government's got. The EU won't agree to that, will they? So
we don't
what do you
know
do
that.
in the meantime?
We don't know that. Like all these things, people start disagreeing with something. If they really care about the Good Friday Agreement, my personal view is we need now to resolve it. There is a part of the Northern Ireland Agreement protocol which nobody remembers. It's Article 13.8, which says if they both agree and this isn't working, they can replace the protocol. It's part of the agreement is that you can replace it if you have a better system. There is a better system. And I believe, therefore, after this election, we should move swiftly to sit down with the EU and say, right, this is what we've got to do. Let's work it out, thrash it out, and then replace this protocol so that both sides can say that they've protected the Good Friday Agreement. That is the number one issue, and we need to go to that.
Iain Duncan-Smith, it's good of you to talk to us, and thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Iain Duncan-Smith, the Conservative MP and former Conservative leader. The time is just about 4:25. Let's take a pause as these results continue to come in and join Martine for the latest news bulletin.
Huw, thank you. Hello. Here is a summary of the BBC News. Police have said they're investigating the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer over possible breaches of COVID rules after he was pictured in Durham last April drinking beer. He's insisted he stopped briefly for a meal and a drink while out campaigning for the Hartlepool by-election before returning to work. The Labour leader earlier hailed local election results, which saw the party seize control of 3 flagship councils in London. Boris Johnson has described the polls as a tough night for the Tories, after the Liberal Democrats and Greens also made gains. Nick Eardley has a roundup of all the election news.
Election highs for some mean lows for others. Labour picked up councils they've never held before in London. Across England, the Conservatives have lost dozens of seats so far.
What is the name of the Queen?
And some are questioning whether the Prime Minister is part of the problem.
This has been a tough night for Conservatives in some parts of the country, and in other parts of the country we're actually moving forward. And so for midterm, it's quite interesting that it's a mixed set of results. But the lesson is we've got to get on with the stuff that matters to people.
The result isn't as bad as some Tories feared, but the final picture could be worse. More losses are likely in the coming hours. And after he was fined for parties in Downing Street, some are pointing the finger of blame at the Prime Minister.
Those in power in Westminster really do need to take a good hard look in the mirror, because it's the rank and file grassroots members that they rely on that are actually losing their seats tonight.
Labour are on the up, at least in some places. They've won Westminster Council for the first time ever. Wandsworth, which had been Conservative blue since the 70s, and Barnet, where Keir Starmer visited this morning. But outside London, it's not as rosy, with Labour struggling to make gains. Have you done enough outside London?
This is a massive turning point for the Labour Party. From the depths of 2019, we're back on track now for the general election, showing what the change that we've done, the hard change we've done in the last 2 years, what a difference it has made.
But this afternoon, the police said they were opening an investigation into the Labour leader over an event he attended during COVID restrictions.
Have you heard from Durham Police, Sir Keir? Any comment on their investigation?
No response from him, but Labour said they would answer questions and that no rules were broken. The biggest gains so far have been for the Liberal Democrats. They took Hull Council from Labour and won seats from the Conservatives in their rural heartlands.
What began as a tremor in Chesham and Amersham, what became an earthquake in North Shropshire, has now turned into a shockwave across our country that can see this Conservative government come tumbling down.
The big picture so far is some bad results for the Conservatives, but not a catastrophic fall in support. And while Boris Johnson is getting some of the blame, there hasn't been a clamour of senior Tories saying that the Prime Minister needs to rethink his position. And although Labour may be delighted with their result in London, in the wider country it's a mixed picture, and some will think the party needs to do a lot better if it's going to win a general election. It's also been a good night for the Greens, who've added to their vote share and number of councillors in places like Amber Valley.
What they've seen is that Greens have been working hard in their communities. There is no such thing as safe seats anymore, only safe voters.
There's a lot more to come, with results pouring in this afternoon. The SNP are continuing to dominate in Scotland, but Labour may stage something of a comeback and take second from the Scottish Tories. In Wales, Labour are eyeing up gains, and there's a test too for Plaid Cymru and their popularity since entering into a cooperation agreement in the Senedd. And many eyes will be on Northern Ireland over the course of the afternoon. Could Sinn Fein beat the DUP into first place for the first time? Nick Early, BBC News.
If you'd like to find out the result in your area, head to the BBC News website or the BBC News app and just enter your postcode. You'll find lots of election analysis and the latest reports from our teams around the country. Now it's back to election 2022.
Yes, welcome back to the BBC Election Studio, and a few developments for us to reflect on in the next half hour or so. The note from Sir John Curtis, Professor Sir John Curtis, our resident expert on Northern Ireland to start with, because this is worth underlining. On the basis of the 10 constituencies whose first preference votes have been declared, says John, we are now forecasting that Sinn Féin will emerge as the party with the highest vote in the new Northern Ireland Assembly. And that, of course, in itself is a matter of history being made. So that's Northern Ireland. 10 constituencies in, plenty more to come. But that's John's forecast there with the rest of the team. So it opens up all kinds of questions about the future of the administration there at Stormont, and Sinn Féin having the right to nominate a First Minister in Michelle O'Neill, and whether, of course, the Unionists will take part in that process. They've suggested in the past that they're not quite sure. So that's a very important development. And secondly, of course, to think about the performance of the Conservatives in England and where they've made losses, to what extent Labour's been responsible, to what extent the Lib Dems, the Greens have been responsible. And I think it's fair to say that we are now in a position to say that looking at the Conservative performance, it does appear to be weaker at this end of the day than it appeared at the start of the day. So to have another look at these figures, and before I discuss that maybe with Vicky, because we've been talking about how we judge the Conservative performance at this stage of the day, let's join Reeta again for a look at some of these main results. And then we'll pick up again. So, Reeta, over to you.
Well, Huw, the scoreboard very much reinforces what you've just been saying. It's a snapshot of where we are now, the state of the parties. And as you can see, Labour has picked up 59 councillors. The Conservatives, as you say, down quite considerably from where they were at the beginning of the day. They have lost 283 councillors, and the bulk of those, I think almost all of them, in the south and slightly towards the east of England as well. Labour then, in that case, between the two parties, the winner in inverted commas. But look at the performance of the Liberal Democrats. I mean, they've gained nearly 3 times as many councillors as Labour, and the Greens on plus 52 have gained almost as many councillors as Labour. So that will be pretty sobering for them. You mentioned some of the key results that have come in this afternoon. Here are some of them. Now, North Yorkshire, this is a new unitary authority that's been set up, and it is a Conservative win. But notionally, given the demographics and the electoral demographics of that area, notionally the Conservatives should have had a 21-seat majority in North Yorkshire. actually they've got a 4-seat majority. So although they've won it, they've rather squeaked home there. They have lost control of Huntingdonshire, where John Major had his Westminster seat, West Oxfordshire, where David Cameron had his Westminster seat, and also Wokingham. So all those 3 councils have now gone into no overall control. Kirklees in West Yorkshire. Now this is a Labour gain from no overall control. Just want to show you some of the figures behind that result. So as you can see, Labour have a majority of 3 seats on Kirklees Council. But I want to show you something strange here, because they have added 2 seats to their tally. They are come top of the share chart, but they've actually lost share on last time these seats were fought. So what is that? Is that because Labour voters in some areas have stayed at home, haven't voted Labour, although they were strong enough in those wards to still be able to hang on to the seats? It's curious, but although it's a Labour gain, their share change has actually gone down. So that's quite interesting. Take you back to my list again. So they've lost control of Hastings, and that is due to a surge in support for the Greens in Hastings. And for the Liberal Democrats, as I was saying, they've had a good night and day of it, particularly in the south of England. They've gained Woking, and they've also won Westmoreland, and Westmoreland is another of 4 new authorities that have been fought over in this election.
Reeta, many thanks. Really useful there to see the spread of the geographical spread, if you like, of those results affecting the Conservatives and the factors at play. I'm going to be a bit daring now, or a bit provocative, Vicky, and say, have we been in danger, certainly earlier today, maybe less so as the day goes on, of underplaying the extent of the Conservative losses? We've heard lots of Conservatives coming on the programme saying, well, of course, London, we expected London. Well, they didn't expect Westminster, but, they expected some losses in London. But elsewhere, the kind of general message, it's not been too bad, really. That's been the kind of message. Actually, it has been quite bad. And the more we see of these results, we realise that, the kind of 3% gap we were talking about earlier, which is now the 5% gap on the PNS, that's actually telling us a rather different story about the Tory performance.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, it's in their interest to underplay it, isn't it? And beforehand, their expectation management, they were talking about losing over 500 seats. Well, I don't think anyone really ever thought that was going to happen. If that did happen, that would be really, really bad news. But, we're heading to over 300 seat losses. This is in England, obviously. The rest, will come later on. But, it will end up being a very bad set of elections for the Conservatives. And I think what happens is, if you look at it in terms of Labour's performance, they've done okay, but not brilliantly. And lots of people saying, well, they've done nowhere near well enough to seize control at the general election. But actually, if you look at the combined opposition to the Tories, which is, of course, the Lib Dems doing extremely well, the Greens doing pretty well, plus Labour, then it shows you what the Conservatives are up against. And if you're a Conservative MP in many of these southern English seats, you're going to be pretty worried. And there's places where they might not even have lost the council, the Conservatives, as we saw that one there in North Yorkshire. But they're losing an awful lot of councillors. So there is definitely a very obvious move against the Conservative Party. We're going to have that in Scotland and Wales as well, maybe not as marked, but certainly in England. And that is going to cause a lot of concern. Now, the question for Boris Johnson, he'll be looking at his own position. Is he safe? At the moment, it doesn't look as if Conservative MPs are willing to move against him. But I don't think this is going to help the atmosphere that there was in Parliament. After all, the talk about Partygate, they were very unhappy about that. They've got to, though, decide on an alternative leader. And at the moment, they haven't decided on that. And that, more than anything else at the moment, is what is probably keeping Boris Johnson in his job.
Vicky, many thanks for now. What I'd like to do now is take a quick look at and remind ourselves of what's going on in Wales. Let's have a look at the Welsh councils and the state of the parties there. We're not halfway yet in terms of councils declared. 9 out of 22 local authorities in Wales. Labour at the moment in terms of councillors up 29. The Independents are down 21, Plaid's up 5, the Tories are down 27, and the Lib Dems are up 10, the Greens are up 4. And if we look at the councils themselves, well, Labour having added one council in terms of control, Plaid Cymru on 1, no change. The Independents having lost 2, and the Conservatives and the Lib Dems on no controls at the moment. Hung councils, lots of hung councils in Wales going into these elections. Well, there are 5 at the moment. They've added 1. I want to look at the result in Blaenau Gwent. This will be known to many viewers as Ebbw Vale. It's been known as Blaenau Gwent for a long time now, going back to its Welsh name. And Labour on 21 seats, the Independents on 12. There was a very big independent group there last time in charge running the council there. The other parties on none at all, a majority of 9. Now, look at what's happened to the Labour vote. They put on 12 seats, which is a very significant move there on Blaenau Gwent Council, and the independent group there down 11, Plaid down 1. So a pretty significant shift there in Blaenau Gwent, which Mark Drakeford and his team will be very happy with in Cardiff, surveying the scene. And one of Mark Drakeford's ministerial colleagues, I'm pleased to say Vaughan Gething is joining us now from Cardiff. Vaughan Gething, thanks very much for joining us and waiting to talk to us. Let's have your readout of where you are in Wales right now.
Well, Pnawn da, Huw, I think it's a good performance so far from a Welsh Labour point of view. In local elections, there's always a more difficult fight between established parties and independents. Now, in Blaenau Gwent, I think that's a really good result for us, you've just highlighted. But when it comes to the direct Labour and Conservative fights, we appear to be doing particularly well. Now, I've knocked doors on over half the local authorities in Wales as part of this campaign. There have been some consistent messages. There are both local issues that you can't replicate anywhere else. And I think 3 national themes that have really come over to me. One is the pandemic, that maybe if I'm on the doorstep, people talk about it. But in particular, people have talked about not just the COVID response in the comparison with England. They've talked about the cost of living crisis, and they've also talked about the Prime Minister not being an honest man. And so those things are all combining in different ways, together with what I think has been a fantastic campaign on the ground by our activists across the country.
Where's the sharpest confrontation that you can pinpoint for us between Labour and the Conservatives in Wales?
Well, certainly if you look in the city of Cardiff, and in North Cardiff in particular, we're seeing gains that are, I think, at the top end of our expectations, Huw. We won a seat in Rada, we won seats in Wychan and Tongwynlais, and also we might win a seat in Rwbaina. Now, you may know the geography, other viewers may not do, but that's a pretty significant set of results in Labour-Conservative fights, and in seats that should be marginals when it comes to a general election. So I think that's good news for us. And equally up in North Wales, in Denbighshire, we're now the largest party, a really dreadful result for the Tories, going from being the largest party to being the 4th party within Denbighshire, and Labour is now the largest party. That includes a number of seats that went to the Conservatives in the 2019 general election. So the mood and the shift is definitely towards us when it comes to Labour and Conservative contests. I look forward to seeing more of those results across Bridgend and the Vale of Glamorgan and others as well.
We're just having a look at the Denbighshire results there, Vaughan, as you were speaking, just underlining the fact and showing a Labour gain of 3 seats there. Independents up 4 and the Tories down 9. The Greens up 2. North East Wales, of course, being part of the red wall that we talk about, and the fact that the Tories, as you say, in 2019 made inroads there into areas that had been rock solid Labour for a long, long time. Do you think that was a blip? Is that gone now, or is the threat still there for you from the Tories?
I think there's definitely still a risk there. You won't hear me or any Labour figure locally or nationally take for granted that we're going to win all those seats back in a general election. It'll still be really competitive, but it does show that we're not in the position we were in 2019. That's real progress for us in Wales, and really important if we're going to have a UK Labour government following the next general election. The other good news, of course, is just a year ago we won a number of those constituencies in the Senedd election results too. So real progress that is being reinforced here. And I think when people see Labour versus Conservatives on a constituency level in a general election, these results give us real cause for optimism and something to build on moving forward.
We mentioned Cardiff and we mentioned Wrexham. These obviously they're urban areas. I'm just wondering, because Labour traditionally in Wales has also had a presence in more rural areas, let's say Carmarthenshire, for example. How have you done there?
Well, it's a pretty mixed set of results. They're not all complete yet. I think we're going to see some gains for us. The council there is a coalition between Plaid Cymru and Independent, so it'll be very interesting to see where that lands. And in Pembrokeshire, again, there are 2 Conservative seats covering Pembrokeshire and 1 straddling Carmarthenshire, as you know. So actually seeing that set of results, and not just seeing how many we've won, but the overall share of those will be really important for us to understand if we're on track to be competitive in those constituencies come a UK general election. But I think this will be a good set of results for Labour here in Wales, adding to the UK-wide picture where we are making gains overall.
We're just having a look there again, Vaughan, at the Pembrokeshire result, showing 2 gains for you and Plaid down 4 and the Lib Dems up 2. Just one thing to end then, because we're just looking at a UK level, and overnight people were looking at Labour's gains, obviously, and we've been talking to Emily Thornberry and other colleagues of yours. But Sir John Curtis, who's our respected expert on these things, was saying that Labour's performance overnight, while being, a winning performance in the sense that it's 5 points ahead on the projected national share, is nonetheless not a performance that is pointing towards a general election victory at this point, and for that reason you shouldn't get too excited. Now, do you accept that?
Well, I think we can be positive without being overly excited, because we know that the road between here and a general election, there's quite a lot of ground to cover. I also think that the local elections can only tell you part of the story. As I was saying, on the doorstep, there are lots of very local issues that were in voters' minds when they're going to vote. And in a general election, you won't have a group of independents who are seen as real contenders to win seats. So the arithmetic and the way people think is different. And I've had on many doorsteps that people are prepared to vote to support local candidates in this set of election, including some Conservatives, but they would not countenance voting Conservative in a general election. So I think for us, the picture shows that we're moving in the right direction. Of course, there's more to do, but I also think it's a really poor night for the Conservatives.
Vaughan, many thanks for joining us. Vaughan Gething,
Good to talk.
The minister in Cardiff, one of Mark Drakeford's cabinet in Cardiff Bay. Thanks to Vaughan Gething. Let's just look at the state of the parties in Northern Ireland as they stand, because we'll be taking a quick look at that in more detail. Sinn Féin currently on first preferences there, you can see on 27%, up 2%, 13 of 18 constituencies declared. The DUP, Democratic Unionists, on 23%, down 6%, and the Alliance Party, which doesn't take a stance on the constitutional future of Northern Ireland, on 15%. That's up for the Ulster Unionists on 11%. The Traditional Unionist Voice on 8%. That's a significant rise there for them on 5%. The SDLP on 8%. That's down 3%. So it's interesting then to look at seats. If we look at seats, 15 of 90 seats in the Assembly. Sinn Féin on 10 as we stand, and DUP on 2, the Alliance on 2, the UUP on 1. And I suppose in that sense, Vicky, when we look towards the rest of the evening, don't want to get viewers too excited that we're going to get a complete set of results from Northern Ireland within a couple of hours, because it's not going to happen. It'll be into the early hours probably. But just to underline for people joining us, Sir John Curtis has already been on to say we are looking at history being made in Northern Ireland. We are looking at Sinn Féin for the first time topping the poll. And then we're into a really quite a bit of a headache, I'd have thought, around formation possibly of a new administration and what happens to that problematic protocol that we were discussing earlier. So we really are seeing history in the making in Northern Ireland today.
Yeah, and I think for the people of Northern Ireland, of course, the main thing would be a functioning Stormont Assembly, which, of course, they haven't had for a long time. And I think the Westminster government, above all, would like that to happen. Now, it's worth explaining how it works, of course. If Sinn Féin were to be the biggest party, they could then be the first minister, but you have to have the deputy minister as well. So then you have to make sure that they are involved and that they nominate as well. And the problem has been, of course, that the Northern Ireland Protocol, now that is all to do with the Brexit agreement, of course, it means that there are checks on goods going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. It's caused an awful lot of unhappiness. The unionist community completely against it, and they want the Westminster government to do something about it. And the big question is, what will they do about it? Now, I was told not very long ago that there would be something in the Queen's speech, a specific bill allowing ministers in Westminster to override parts of that Northern Ireland Protocol. Incredibly controversial. Certainly the EU would think that was incredibly controversial. We're now being told that that isn't the case, but there will be some wording around upholding the Good Friday Agreement. But it's how far they're going to go about that and how they're going to resolve this issue. And you just feel that until that happens, getting Stormont up and running so that actually they can function, they can spend money on the things that people there want it to be spent on, like everywhere else. There's a cost of living crisis there too. That's what they need to happen. But that might not be resolved for many, many months.
Well, counting's still going on. And let's go to County Londonderry and to Magherafelt. And Tara Mills is there. Tara, what's the latest you have for us?
Well, Huw, it's a very unusual election, but of course, as you only know too well, Northern Ireland is a politically very unusual place because we're going through all the motions. We have the highs and lows, we have the cheers, we have the sobs in the background, but yet we're not sure if there will be a functioning executive, as Vicky talked about there, that will be up and running come next week. So in very simple terms, Michelle O'Neill, the Northern leader of Sinn Fein, has topped the poll in her constituency. Jeffrey Donaldson has done the same in his constituency, of course, the DUP leader, but it's much more complicated than that. But the big story, I think, out of this election, there is no question, no matter what happens in the weeks and months ahead, the big story from this election will be the potential of a Sinn Féin First Minister. I spoke to Michelle O'Neill a short time ago. She said she wasn't going to predict that at this stage, but it looks highly likely.
Let's think about the issue that Vicky was mentioning there, which is the issues opened up by the direction of this election, if you like, and the fact that John Curtis was telling us earlier that Sinn Féin are looking to top the poll. What do you think the likely course of events is going to be in the next few weeks? That is to say, with the actual practical logistics of trying to put an administration in place and to get agreement on that. How do you see that going?
It's incredibly difficult, and actually it was the Conservative Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis who really threw the cat among the pigeons on Wednesday night by saying, as Vicky explained there, that we were expecting this legislation that would allow some sort of overriding of the protocol. That now appears to have gone away, and I mean really unusual timing, quite extraordinary for a Conservative minister to come on the airwaves the night before a country decides in terms of the election. But if we set that to the side for the moment, what's supposed to happen in an ideal scenario where we didn't have all these other factors, then the parties would be back at Stormont on Monday. They'd have 8 days to put together, nominate a first and deputy first ministers. Then there's this complicated process where they divvy out the ministerial posts, but that looks highly unlikely that is going to happen. We've already had the mood music from Jeffrey Donaldson. In fact, even getting the sense that he's a Westminster MP as well, getting the sense that perhaps he won't even give up his Westminster MP seat, so he may well not take his seat at Stormont.
Tara, thanks very much. And just a last little thing on timings. How's it looking there in terms of completing declarations, do you think?
It's difficult. We have this sort of timings from the last time around. That sort of has all gone up in the air. We have a couple of very tight seats. Obviously, it's a proportional representation, STV election. So those fifth seats in each of our 18 constituencies will be absolutely critical. And I'll give you, for instance, in the Foyle constituency, there's a DUP and an Ulster Unionist Party candidate. At the minute, they're neck and neck. They've called for a recount at this stage. That's even only at the first stage. So we could see it going well into the night.
Tara, that's great. Thanks very much for bringing us up to date there, Tara Mills. Let's go from County Londonderry over to Belfast and join Anita, who's got a guest to talk to there as well.
Huw, thank you very much. Yes, we've just had a couple more results come in the last few minutes in the constituency of South Down. 2 MLAs elected for Sinn Fein. Sinead Ennis with 14,381 votes, which was more than 5,000 votes above the quota required to get elected. So a huge result there for Sinn Fein. And of course, we've seen Professor Sir John Curtis saying that on the basis of the constituencies declared so far, that we're forecasting that Sinn Fein will indeed emerge as the biggest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. With me now is Gerry Kelly from Sinn Fein. Thank you for joining us. Re-elected yourself in North Belfast. So you must be very pleased with these results coming in so far. Are you confident that Sinn Fein is indeed going to emerge as the biggest party at the end of the count?
Well, I mean, this is PR election, so it takes quite a while. This could go on until the middle of the night, but so far I'm very pleased with how we've done, whether it be North Belfast, South Down, and a number of other constituencies in the first preference votes. So yes, we're glad, and I think it reflects. We went out to the electorate saying what we need here is the cost of living crisis and the health system. We need money and resources put in that, but we have to have a government to do that. We want to be able to set up the executive and move forward on that basis. On every door that we're talking about the cost of living, and I presume that's true right across both islands. So we know what the issues are. It's getting in and getting working at making a difference in terms of it.
So yeah, we're forecasting highest share. We have to wait and see if that translates into the highest number of seats, but certainly that's what polls have been indicating. And Colm Eastwood, the leader of the SDLP, was speaking to colleagues in BBC Northern Ireland a little earlier, and he was a little bit downbeat, I think it's fair to say. He felt that the party was perhaps suffering because nationalist voters were lending their votes or giving their votes in terms of first preferences to Sinn Fein because nationalists want to see a nationalist politician in the position of First Minister. So do you think that, that is part of what's we're seeing here with these huge numbers for you?
Well, I have to be very frank. I think it's an excuse for how his strategy and the SDLP are doing. We didn't ask for anybody. We didn't ask to borrow anybody's vote. We put out the policies there. We told them what they were. We told them where we wanted to go with it, and that we wanted to be working together, and that they had a chance to do that. That this could be a very important election, and people come out and voted for us. In fact, they were telling us on the doors what we'd already been saying ourselves before the election. And this was quite a long election. It was 6 weeks before that started. So no, I don't accept that it's a borrowed vote, because we didn't ask for borrowed votes. We asked for people to vote upon our view of the issue, and they voted for us in much more numbers than they voted for the SDLP.
And the DUP has made it clear it doesn't want to turn to the Assembly unless its concerns about the protocol are addressed. So at the end of the day, we're going through this voting process, this counting process. And when I spoke to voters on Tuesday in Antrim, they all said to me, look, what we want, first and foremost, irrespective of political background, is an Assembly that's functioning. So how on earth are all of you as politicians, whatever party you're from, going to get to that point?
Well, we've had a long history of having difficulties, and we've always been able to sort them out. The DUP has been involved in that. The parties that are doing well are the parties who were talking about, let's get together, let's put the executive together, let the government work. For the first time in over 20 years, we're getting a 3-year budget. The DUP have to be involved in that. And
but there have been huge periods of dysfunction, haven't there? And you've had civil servants making decisions rather than elected representatives.
Yes, and we have a history. If we go back, and I know you don't want to go back in history, but we had a history where unionism used to be a very dominant force. The demographics have changed, people's policies have changed, social issues have changed, and the DUP are suffering from that in this election. So they need to know. They call themselves the Democratic Unionist Party. We're saying you have to listen to democracy. You have to accept what the result of this vote is. The election is now over, and they need to be a part of what going forward is. But based on the Good Friday Agreement and the other agreements since then.
Just very briefly, because we're almost out of time, Alliance leader Naomi Long told me a little while ago that the process, the system at Stormont needs to be reconfigured to incentivise cooperation. Would you welcome that?
Well, the Good Friday Agreement was a very hard instrument, or a very hard agreement to come to. It was on the basis of a long period of conflict. It's on the basis of the history of the north of Ireland and Ireland, and between Ireland and Britain. We got the Good Friday Agreement. The parties, the majority of the people actually voted on it. There was a referendum. It is a bespoke process to move forward, and that's the way we should move forward.
Yeah.
And just because the
DUP,
DUP political unions are now arguing that you need to change that, I don't think that's an argument for changing it.
Gerry Kelly of Sinn Féin, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, the Good Friday Agreement, it was set up to encourage power sharing. It hasn't always worked all the time. As I said, there have been periods when the Stormont Assembly has gone into the deep freeze, effectively, where civil servants have been making the decisions. So trying to unpick that could be difficult, but nonetheless, these parties that have up to now had to designate themselves as others rather than as unionists or nationalists, they are saying maybe it's time for a change to reflect that vote in Northern Ireland. We'll be keeping across all the results as they come in and trying to keep you right up to date with those. Back to you, Huw.
Anita, we'll have more from you later on, obviously, as more results come in. Many thanks. Anita McVeigh there for us in Belfast. A look at the state of the parties in Scotland. Let's remind ourselves what's going on there with the 29 of the 32 local authorities declared, so virtually a full set of results with the Scottish National Party again dominant, 434 councillors having added 23 to the tally. Labour on 273, that's up 19, so very much in second place, pushing the Tories down to third place on 196, having lost 61 councillors in Scotland. And then we have the Independents and the Lib Dems having gained 20, the Greens having gained 13. In terms of councils being controlled, well, the Independents hanging on to 3. The SNP right now controlling 1, having gained that 1. Labour having gained 1. The Conservatives and the Lib Dems on none. And hung councils in Scotland, by far the biggest grouping, 24 of them down 2. So let's have a look at the key wards in 322 of the 347 declared. So the vast majority of the key wards, these are the ones that hold a special significance. They've been selected to show us maybe which way the wind is blowing in a more focused way based on the selected wards there, with the SNP on 34% of the vote. That's up to, based on the comparison with the last time these were contested. Labour on 22% and the Tories on 19%. Now, what that does, of course, is again underline the fact that Labour is back in second place in terms of the parties in Scotland, as Anna Sarwar was telling us a short while ago. The Tories, under Douglas Ross, they're going down to 19%. They've lost 6% in those key wards based on a comparison with last time. So at the top of the list, as before, and indeed having strengthened their position based on that analysis, the Scottish National Party, and their leader at Westminster is Iain Blackford. And Iain has shown remarkable patience waiting to talk to us this afternoon. So I'm grateful to you, Iain, for waiting to talk to us. I'd just like your overview, first of all, rather than you telling us how well you've done. I'd rather you give me an overview of what Scottish politics looks like this evening.
Well, you know, the SNP has been in government, as you're aware, Huw, for a very long time, been in government in Holyrood since 2007. And over the course of the last few years, we've increased our vote, increased our representation. At Holyrood, we've been doing that at local council level, and we've done it again tonight. And I'm so pleased that we've now got overall majority in Dundee and increased our presence really up and down the country. I think what the people of Scotland have done is given a very clear message to Boris Johnson and to the Conservative government that we want action to deal with the cost of living crisis. People are really suffering to put food on the table, that choice between feeding and heating, and we need cash help for families, for businesses to come forward now. And we've got the opportunity next week in the Queen's speech. But secondly, I think people have reflected on Partygate, that when everyone else was following the rules, making enormous sacrifices over the COVID period, that it was one rule for the rest of us, but it was another rule for Boris Johnson, and that culture of partying that was going on at Westminster. And Douglas Ross, poor Douglas Ross, who seems to have flip-flopped between asking Boris Johnson to go and asking him to stay. And I saw your interview with him earlier. He doesn't seem to know what he's asking Boris Johnson to do now. Let me be clear. On behalf of those that have voted in the election in Scotland today, Boris Johnson has to go. We cannot have a Prime Minister that has repeatedly lied to Parliament, that has acted in a way that he's misused the trust that was put in him of being Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And if there's one lesson out of today, that is that Boris Johnson has to go. And the second lesson for us is that we won this election reaffirming the case that the people of Scotland have got that right to determine their own future. And my government, led by the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has an absolute commitment based on that mandate given to us last year at the Scottish elections of making sure that the people of Scotland have that opportunity to vote in an independence referendum, of taking us away from the sleaze and the corruption of Westminster and allowing us to become an independent country, one that will be back into the family of nations in the European Union.
You mentioned Partygate there, Iain. I'm bound to ask you, because we're asking people for reaction. Were you surprised that Durham Police have announced that they're now reopening or revisiting the issue around Sir Keir Starmer and what people are calling Beergate, having at one point looked at it and said they didn't think there was anything to pursue? Did that surprise you today?
Well, let me say, if the police have gathered evidence that suggests that they need to make inquiries, then of course they should do that. But Huw, let's make a distinction between what may have gone on here and whether or not there's a case to be answered. Because we're talking about the culture at Westminster, the Prime Minister that was responsible not just for putting rules in place, putting laws in place. Now, we know that they systematically broke those laws. We know that more than 50 people have been fined for their behaviour around Downing Street. And the fact that we know that this investigation has not finished running its course yet, there is more to come. And of course, we're waiting on the Huw Gray report. And it's that endemic culture and the fact that the Prime Minister was asking people to behave in a certain way, that they couldn't be with their loved ones when they were dying in hospital, couldn't be with them in care homes, couldn't even attend family funerals properly. And yet we know that the Prime Minister, through his office, was instigating a culture where people were being invited to parties. So there is no equivalence, I would argue, with what may have happened elsewhere. But of course, everyone has to be held accountable under the law.
Yeah.
But it's clear through all of this that we have an institutional style of behaviour within Downing Street that frankly is just not acceptable.
Can I just return, Iain, if I may, just for this final question to Scottish politics and the future of Scotland? Can we take it that, given your performance in these local elections, you've come out on top again, and you've added a few percentage points, which in the rules of politics and governments and parties that are in power for a long time is in itself something of note? Can we take it it's now full steam ahead with those plans for a referendum on independence, and that there's absolutely no holding you back on that?
Yeah, well, it is full steam ahead. The boiler is being stoked, and I can say to you that our government in Edinburgh will be publishing a number of papers over the course of the coming months. And we'll be getting out, we'll be consulting with people, we'll be listening to people, we'll be having that debate about what kind of country people want to live in. One where we accept our responsibilities to deliver on the promise of green energy, but to have an industrial strategy that sits alongside that, driving investment into the economy, dealing with poverty, and contrasting what we're doing, where we're increasing the Scottish child payment up to £25, really trying to make a difference for people that are struggling. And that vision of a wealthier Scotland, but one where we take our responsibilities to eradicate poverty. So I'm looking forward to having that debate. And certainly our commitment to the people of Scotland is we will absolutely deliver on the mandate that they give us to make sure that we have the independence referendum. But let me say to Westminster, whether it's Boris Johnson or his successor, that any government in Westminster has got to respect democracy, has got to respect that in election after election, people in Scotland speak out and make it clear that they want that choice, to have that say in their future, and woe betide anybody in Westminster that seeks to deny democracy.
Iain Blackford, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Huw.
Iain Blackford there, the Westminster leader of the Scottish National Party. Our thanks to him. Let's catch up with a few of these results still coming in from the English councils. We've just got 7 minutes or so left on air. Reeta, back to you.
Of got one very eye-catching result for you, Huw. It is a glimmer of silver lining for the Conservatives in the otherwise dark cloud that is London for them. They have gained Harrow from the Labour Party. This on a night where they've lost Westminster and Wandsworth and Barnet. They've gained Harrow. It's been Labour since 2010, but they've now got a majority on the council of 7 seats. It's really interesting because actually in neighbouring boroughs like Hillingdon and Ealing, we've seen the Labour Party going forwards. But in Harrow, just take a look at this. This is the seat change. The Conservatives have just swooped in and swiped 8 seats off Labour. So good news story for them in Harrow, in stark contrast to quite a lot of their other performance in London.
Reeta, thanks very much again. That result in from Harrow, which again is a contrast with some of the others we've seen. We mentioned earlier the projected national share, and Sir John Curtis was explaining that to us, giving Labour a 5-point lead based on the projection that John and the team had come up with. How would that translate into a House of Commons scenario? The figures are going to go up on the screen for you, and I'm going to ask John to talk to them. John, talk us through these figures.
Well, what we've done here is we've taken the projected national share, but then we've also taken into account the fact that we know from the quite a few occasions over the last 2 decades when a general and a local election has been held on the same day, that people don't necessarily vote in the same way. And in particular, Liberal Democrats tend to do better in local elections than they do in a general election held on the same day. So we've taken that historical experience and, as it were, applied it to those estimates of Labour 35, Conservative 30, Liberal Democrat 19 that you saw a few hours earlier. So that gives us, as it were, a revised set of likely votes for the parties. And we've then used those to project, well, what might the House of Commons might be. Now, this is what our former colleague Peter Snow would have called a little bit of fun. But as we're getting to the end of the programme, we thought that perhaps this was the due moment to do so. But in a sense, it makes a serious point. Crucial point number one is that, yes, the Labour Party on this performance isn't likely at the moment to be in a position to win an overall majority. But that said, it is in a position to have many more seats than the Conservatives. And on the kind of performance we saw in yesterday's ballot boxes, the Conservatives would have no prospect of being able to remain in office. However, Labour's chances, of course, would depend on its ability to reach a deal with the other smaller parties. And what I invite you to note is that if you add the Labour figure of 291 and the Liberal Democrat figure of 31, you get to 322, which means once you take into account the fact that Sinn Fein don't take all their seats, and any SDLP MPs that get elected from Northern Ireland will vote with Labour, that probably Sir Keir Starmer might just have enough support from the Democrats if he can get it without having to look to the SNP. If that were to happen, the implications would be that if he wished to deny the SNP a second referendum, he might be able to do so. But, of course, the Liberal Democrats will have their own price, and it's widely thought that that would be a referendum on proportional representation. Now, I will let Labour members and voters decide which of those two options is to be preferred, but they both, of course, would potentially have important implications for the long-term future of the Labour Party, if not necessarily for Sir Keir Starmer himself.
And great to have you with us today. Thanks a lot, John, again. And we may talk later on in the evening, of course. But for now, I'm going to say thank you. And thanks to Reeta as well at the touchscreen, of course, for taking us through all of the results. Reeta will be back again with us at 7 o'clock on the BBC News Channel. Vicky, a final word and something you've just picked up as well?
Well, it's just thinking about what he's saying there. A bit of fun, of course, but that's 112 seats lost for the Conservatives under that estimate compared to the 2019 election. And that's the kind of thing that makes Conservative MPs very unhappy. And a lot of them will be looking at the results today, thinking that actually it's been a worse night than they were expecting. They'll be very worried about the encroachment of the Liberal Democrats in many of those seats, and they will feel under pressure. And that in turn, of course, puts the Prime Minister under pressure. We'll have to see whether they actually act on it, though, because that is not guaranteed.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Vicky, once again. So, back at 7 o'clock on the BBC News channel. Sophie will be here at 6 o'clock with BBC News at 6. But, of course, the analysis continues. Plenty of it on BBC News online as well. But from all of the team on BBC Election Day 2022, thanks for watching and bye for now.